Have you ever imagined seeing the success rate of everything you do? Well, that's exactly what happens to a guy who's tired of his ordinary life. Until one day, out of nowhere, he gains a crazy ability. He can see the chances of success in any decision. Want to invest money, he already knows if it will work. And using that, he starts to change his life completely, going from a nobody to someone extremely powerful, always choosing the best path and avoiding any mistakes. So without further ado, let's get into the video. A young man was walking suddenly through the streets because his landlord had kicked him out and changed all the locks. Now if he could not pay the rent, he might have to sleep on the street. On top of that, his new book had failed again, and he could no longer rely on manuscript fees. His name was Bai Wu, an 18th tier writer. A complete failure, and his representative work was starting today. Irate slimes, he looked into his pockets, calculating how many meals he could still afford with the little money he had left. But when he saw the amount he still had, he thought that maybe he would need to wash dishes to survive. As he walked, he saw a convenience store and thought that his life had already hit rock bottom, so buying a lottery ticket to try his luck really did not matter anymore. He asked the seller for a 5 yuan scratch-off ticket. The shopkeeper placed a few tickets on the table and asked which one he wanted. The protagonist, already hopeless, said he was just trying his luck, so anyone would do. But suddenly his vision began to blur a little, and some percentages started appearing in front of him. Frightened, he wondered what was happening, since his vision was a bit blurry. But maybe it was because he had stayed up all night writing yesterday. The shopkeeper handed him a ticket, and the rate on it was 100%, while the protagonist still could not understand what exactly that was, wondering if only he could see it, or if perhaps it was just an illusion. However, he thought he should buy a ticket to test it. As soon as he scratched it, he won 10, and this made him excited. And he thought that maybe it really was what he was imagining. He asked the seller to give him 2 more, and chose the ones with a 100% rate. Those 2 each earned him 50 yuan. The protagonist could not believe that the numbers on the scratch-offs represented the probability of winning. Excited by this, he asked the shopkeeper to hand him 11 more scratch-offs, and the shopkeeper was a little surprised by that request. Bai Yu picked a total of 10 tickets, with a 100% success rate and one with 0. He preferred to start with the one that had a 0% chance of winning, and he really did not win anything. He was impressed to see that he could truly see the success rate. The shopkeeper laughed and patted him on the shoulder, saying that playing a little was for fun, but playing too much could harm the body and mind, and he should learn to stop. While he was ahead, Byu threw all his money onto the table, asking for 10 20 yuan lottery tickets, and won 10 yuan ticket. The shopkeeper was happy, because he believed he was going to take all of the protagonist's money. He held the tickets in his hand and asked if he was really sure he still wanted to buy them, saying he should not let the last 200 yuan in prize money he had won earlier go down the drain. 10 minutes later, the shopkeeper made a transfer of 20,420 yuan and wondered what kind of absurd luck that was. Bai Wu thought that the percentages on the lottery tickets represented the probability of winning. However, the prize amount was completely unknown. It would be great if he could know the prize amount before buying the ticket. For example, the probability of winning 100 or other amounts. The shopkeeper still did not know how so much luck could exist in a single person. Suddenly the protagonist noticed a few things and asked the shopkeeper to sell him a few more. No mistakes, no hits, scratch-off tickets. The percentages this time changed a little. Some tickets had only 10%, while others had 100%, 150%, or even 200%. The shopkeeper continued, saying that the protagonist should stop while he was winning, because luck was truly unpredictable and could both appear and disappear in a matter of seconds. Bai Wu laughed and said it was fine, because he felt that his luck was very good that day, and if he did not win, the shopkeeper could consider it a contribution to the welfare cause. But the shopkeeper was very irritated, thinking that the protagonist had just won 20,000, so he really wanted to see how long his luck would last. Bai Wu picked another ticket with a 10% chance of winning, and when he scratched it, he realized he had won. He laughed, saying that it seemed his luck was still there. The shopkeeper became more and more frustrated with all of that, while the protagonist kept scratching and winning. But the shopkeeper realized that it had already been 6 tickets in a row, and all of them had won prizes. So how could there be someone with that much luck? On this planet, the protagonist scratched another ticket and said that his luck really was very good that day, because he had just won again. He looked at the other tickets still for sale, thinking that he could know what the success rate of winning 50 yuan was. Suddenly, all the percentages that had been appearing before simply changed drastically, and the protagonist celebrated, because this was exactly what he had expected. The sudden success rate was an answer based on the question he wanted to know at that moment. So as long as he adjusted the questions and used the success rate correctly, he could perfectly deceive the owner of that store, and with that he could change his own destiny. Bai Wu looked at the shopkeeper and laughed, saying that from the looks of it, his luck really was very good. The shopkeeper asked if he really meant just very good, because from the looks of it, he must have accumulated a lot of good karma. In his past life, the protagonist laughed, thinking that with that divine artifact in his hands, this was not about accumulating good karma. In a past life, Bai Yu gave a friendly laugh, and said that his luck was very good, so he would like 20 more tickets. The shopkeeper became a little irritated, telling the protagonist that luck really was a very good thing, but he should not get addicted to this kind of thing. Bai Wu said it was fine, because his luck was very good that day, and maybe those 20 tickets could also have prizes. Even if he lost, he had already managed to win more than 20,000, so it would not make much difference. He placed the ticket on the table and picked up a coin. The shopkeeper already placed his hand over his heart, preparing himself for a heart attack. The protagonist began scratching slowly, and the shopkeeper watched every surgical movement. But as soon as the scratch-off was fully scratched, the shopkeeper breathed a sigh of relief, because the protagonist had not won again. He told the young man that he had already warned him, because luck was unpredictable and unreliable. BYU thought that luck was indeed unreliable, but something else was. He quickly continued scratching all the other scratch-offs there, and simply did not win on any of them. The shopkeeper felt relieved by all of this, and that he had already warned the protagonist to quit while he was winning, but he refused to listen, and he had probably already used up all his luck for the year by winning consecutively just now. Bai Wu looked at the remaining tickets and saw one with an extremely high percentage. He was impressed and held that ticket in his hand, thinking that indeed he did not trust his luck, but rather the ability he had just received, because he had deliberately bought scratch-offs with a 0% success rate. That way he could scratch several without winning, to avoid raising suspicion by winning too much. So his losses had been intentional. The shopkeeper made an offer, saying he would give back 100 and let the rest go, because with the protagonist's current luck, winning at least one of those 10 tickets would already be very good. But the protagonist refused, saying there was no need, though he thanked him for his kindness, because he would not believe anymore. However, this was also part of his plan, because now it was time to change things. How could he simply let that pass? The shopkeeper said the protagonist could do whatever he wanted, because he had tried to warn him several times. As soon as the protagonist scratched another scratch-off, he shouted, telling the shopkeeper that his luck had returned. The shopkeeper looked at the scratch-off and said it was only 10 yuan, and from the way Bai Yu shouted, it sounded like 10,000. Bai Wu managed to win several times consecutively. However, he was a little upset, because the maximum prize was only 100. The shopkeeper could not believe it, crying that the boy was some kind of freak of nature. The protagonist focused, saying to the heavenly spirit and the earthly spirit that he really wanted that last ticket to win a big prize of more than 10,000. The shopkeeper asked if he really knew how rare it was for someone to win a big prize of more than 10,000. On a scratch-off, Bai Wu laughed, picked up the ticket he had saved for last, and told the shopkeeper that he had just won 15,000. And from the looks of it, his luck really was defying the heavens. As soon as the shopkeeper paid him the 15,000 prize, Bai Yu asked what he had been saying before, something related to a lucky streak, but the shopkeeper said it was nothing, while thinking that something was not right. Suddenly he had a great idea and looked at the tickets, thinking that the winning rate of lottery tickets, when it came to scratch-offs, was fixed when they were printed. Since the protagonist had won so much, the ones left now would probably be nothing but trash. To try to recover some of the money he had lost there, the shopkeeper went over to the protagonist, saying that his luck really was incredible, and asked if he wanted to take another small risk. He thought that if other people came there later to buy more tickets, and only won 1 or 2 out of every 10 tickets, then that would be very bad for him. When it came to running his own business, Bai Wu asked what the winning rates of the remaining scratch-off tickets in the cabinet were. Then, a new ability showed the percentage of every ticket, and most of them were at 0%. Only one was close to 5%, and that was not enough. BYU told the shopkeeper that it was better for him to stop, because that was probably the peak of his luck, and he was doomed to get worse from then on. Bai Yu thought that the welfare lottery regulations established a 30% winning rate for scratch-off tickets, but after all that his would be 5%. The shopkeeper kept trying to encourage the protagonist, saying that he had already managed to win more than 35,000, so why could he not keep taking advantage of the opportunity? Bai Wu explained that even if he were only losing a little money, something between 200 or 300, it was still money and people needed to be frugal in order to live a good life in the future. The shopkeeper became a little irritated, because the protagonist had not been saying any of that. Until just a short while ago, Bai Wu told the shopkeeper that he knew very well that he had good intentions. However, he believed that contentment was happiness. The protagonist thought that this time, he had made an extremely huge profit. However, he wondered if his superpower could be used in places other than lottery tickets. As soon as he approached the door, he asked the system what the success rate of opening the door was. Once again, a system screen appeared with a 100% success rate, which meant it really worked. But suddenly, the rate that had been at 100% began to plummet, until it reached 0%. The protagonist became a little frightened, and moved away from the door. Suddenly a husky came running over, and crashed through the glass door. BYU realized that the probability had helped him avoid a disaster, because that dog was extremely reckless, and had almost run him over. The shopkeeper, who was watching all of that, was surprised and began wondering how the protagonist knew he had to dodge in advance before he could leave the store. The shopkeeper grabbed his arm, saying that he should not dare to leave. BYU was startled, thinking that it was over now, and that he had been caught. The shopkeeper asked how he knew. The protagonist thought that this was expected, because his previous actions had been a little strange. He asked his ability what the success rate was of deceiving the shopkeeper and pretending to be just a fortune teller. The system informed him that he had around a 50% probability. He decided to change the question, asking whether if he bragged that his family had passed down the art of fortune telling for generations, the chance would increase. The system changed to 64%. He decided to test it and told the shopkeeper that in truth, he was a fortune teller. In addition, he said that he could not be confused with those street corner scammers because his family's lineage dated back to the Zhou dynasty, with a history of 2,000 to 3,000 years. The shopkeeper thought that he was probably lying, asking if it really had been 2,000 to 3,000 years. He emphasized that he firmly believed in science and did not believe in ghosts or spirits. In addition, he said that if the protagonist's family had existed for 2,000 or 3,000 years, he should be famous if that were really true. The percentage that had previously been at 64% began to fall to 60%. The shopkeeper asked why he had never heard of the protagonist. BYU thought that the box above the shopkeeper's head was already divine intervention. So how could he believe only in science? He continued following the same story, took a deep breath, and explained that his family had been passing down this lineage, revealing heavenly secrets, incurred divine retribution, so they never interfered in drastic changes, and that was why they were not very well known. The percentage began to rise again, and the protagonist became hopeful because of that. He showed the winning tickets on the counter and told the shopkeeper that he had already witnessed his divination abilities before the success rate rose to 80%, and the shopkeeper said that this was difficult, but asked if that really could be the reason for it. BYU said that was exactly it, emphasizing that he had just divined his fortune and wealth. The winnings had all been calculated by him, but he decided to stop because of the reaction from the heavens. So the 10 tickets he had not won were an omen. The percentage reached 90%, and the shopkeeper asked if that was really what had happened, because he had been wondering how BYU could have been lucky enough to win 2 big prizes in a row on scratch-offs. The protagonist continued, saying that as soon as he left, he suddenly felt that something was wrong, and divined that there would be a bloody disaster, which was why he stepped back. The shopkeeper was finally convinced, and called the protagonist master, asking what the price of a divination was, because he would like to have his luck read. BYU thought this was a great opportunity to check the success rate. He decided to refuse, saying that it was better to forget about that matter, because his lineage emphasized karma and retribution, and he had just divined his own financial fortune, which would affect his business in the future. Every cause had an effect, and he asked the shopkeeper what exactly he would like the protagonist to divine. The shopkeeper emphasized that he really wanted his new master to try to divine his luck and wealth, because his old hometown was being demolished, but they had still not negotiated the compensation. Because of that, he wanted to ask the protagonist to divine how much the other party would accept if he made an offer. BYU asked the shopkeeper what value he thought was reasonable. The shopkeeper said that it was a house of 200 to 300 square meters, and adding a rate of 10,000 per square meter. That should be right. BYU said he understood, and closed his eyes to concentrate, asking his new ability what the success rate was of the other party, accepting his offer of 2 million yen as compensation. The ability said it was 100%, so he decided to ask the success rate of the other party, accepting 3 million, and that was also 100%. He raised it to 4 million, and it was also 100%. He decided to raise it to 5 million, but the rate plummeted to 10%. As for 4.5 million, after a short while, he opened his eyes and the shopkeeper became excited, asking if he had managed to divine it. The protagonist said he could offer 4.3 million, because he guaranteed they would agree, without hesitation. If he decided to offer 4.5 million, there was an 80% chance, and with 4.8 million, only a 50% chance. The shopkeeper was impressed, saying that divinations really were very accurate, and truly could be right. Bai Wu said that if he did not believe him, he just had to call the other party right now and make the offer to try it. The protagonist thought this was the perfect opportunity to test the power of that golden finger. The shopkeeper decided to try and said that he would call right now to find out. 1 minute later, the shopkeeper was stunned because the other party had agreed. Without even thinking twice, he thanked his master, saying that he truly was a divine predictor. The shopkeeper had become so happy that he was dancing by himself, saying that karma and retribution really needed to exist. In addition, he said that the master had given him a benefit that was far too great and offered 300,000 as compensation for divining such an excellent amount. Bai Wu decided to accept but tried to remain calm. However, inside, he thought that 300,000 was completely unexpected luck. The shopkeeper quickly transferred the 300,000 to him, and the protagonist said that he was a little embarrassed, but inside he was screaming because he had earned 300,000 so easily, and that really was incredible. With the success rate, life was like a complete cheat. The shopkeeper thanked him once again for doing all of that for him, and said that he deserved every cent he had just earned. Bai Yu said goodbye, saying that he needed to leave now, and the shopkeeper thanked him again, telling him to be careful on his way home. Bai Wu thought that this was extremely powerful. As long as he used this golden finger wisely, he could definitely change his destiny and reach the peak of his life. As soon as he left the store, he saw that the dog that had crashed into the glass was still lying on the ground. He realized that the dog was a purebred and asked his ability if it was possible that it was lost. The golden finger said that the probability was 100%. Bai Wu looked at the dog playing with the little ball and approached it, saying that because of that dog, he had managed to earn a lot of money, so he would help it find its owner again. The dog threw the ball upward with great force. It hit several places, came back, and struck the dog itself on the head, then flew toward the protagonist's head. Bai Wu thought that the owner of that dog probably went through a huge ordeal every single day. The dog tried to drag the protagonist to the side, and he thought that this stupid thing still needed to find its owner, but he had no idea where to start looking. Suddenly the dog began running very fast, bothering some people on the street. Bai Yu decided to follow the dog because he did not know if it would really find its owner, but he needed to follow it to stop something bad from happening. A short while later, in a park, a girl was taking a photo, but the dog was running quickly toward her. Bai Wu fell in love with that girl's beauty. He asked the golden finger what the probability was that the girl was the dog's owner, and the probability was 100%. He thought that his luck was even higher because the owner of that dog was actually a beautiful woman. He had only intended to help the dog find its owner for the dog's sake, and coincidentally managed to test the amplification of the success rate, but he never expected such a happy encounter. The girl continued taking photos, which surprised him because her dog had disappeared, yet she was still calmly taking photos, completely carefree. Suddenly, she looked back and saw the dog. She was surprised and asked if the protagonist also had a husky, because it looked a lot like Oreo. Bai Wu thought that was nonsense, because that was her dog, but she could not even recognize her own dog. Because of that, he was starting to doubt whether the 100% probability that had appeared could be false. The girl continued playing with the dog, saying that even its bark sounded exactly like her dog's, but Oreo was still a little cuter. She continued saying that this dog looked very silly, while hers was smarter. In addition, her dog ate pure and natural dog food that cost 500 per bag, and its fur was softer and better than this dog's. The protagonist tried to get her attention, thinking that this beautiful girl was a little stupid. The girl looked at him and asked what was wrong. Bai Wu explained that if nothing was wrong, then that was Oreo. The girl laughed, saying that the joke was not funny at all, because her dog had been firmly tied to the bench. But as soon as she looked at the bench, she realized that the leash had snapped. 5 minutes later, the girl was very embarrassed, saying she was sorry for everything she had said, and thanking him for helping. He added her as a new friend. He told her that it was fine, because it was good that the dog had not gotten lost alone in the middle of the city. But the truth was that he had found a pure girl who had never been in a relationship and had lived alone since birth. He looked at some of her posts, but felt a little lost because this was the first time he had added a beautiful girl as a friend. But at least he had gone to the right place. He looked at other posts and saw that her dog was very destructive. He pointed out that the dog was a little wild and destroyed things from time to time, and if it were him, he would have been kicked out by the landlord a long time ago. He noticed that she became a little embarrassed by that and emphasized that he had no right to say those things to her, because his landlord had changed the lock on his rented apartment today, and he had no roof over his head. The girl who was leaving asked why he needed to rent a place, since it was better to live in his own house, then said goodbye, saying she needed to go back now. Bai Wu began thinking about it, because now that he had the success rate, he did not need to worry about rent, since getting rich and buying a house was within his reach. He continued walking down the street, asking himself how he could get rich and buy a house, because even after the demolition compensation, 300,000 was not enough for the down payment. And that kind of thing did not happen often. Because of that, he needed to find a stable and quick way to make money. The fastest ways to make money might be the lottery, or stock trading. As he walked, he passed by an antique treasure shop, and realized that he could find hidden gems in antique stores. Several people offered him various things. To other people who were sitting nearby, noticed that the boy walking there was definitely a rookie, since he seemed to have 0 sense, and was very ignorant. The protagonist crouched near a stall, and thought that those guys definitely believed he was an easy target, a naive beginner, and that was why they were all trying to deceive him. The seller near him explained that all the things for sale there were heirlooms from his own family. Because his surname was Li, he had heard that his ancestors were descendants of Emperor Taizong of Tang. Li Shimin, the protagonist, told him not to worry, because he would just take a good look at the items. He began laughing because no one expected that he, just a rookie, had the golden finger, and could not be deceived by anyone. Then he told his ability that he wanted to know the success rate of buying genuine antiques. At that stall, probability appeared as 100%, but the protagonist became a little cautious, asking if all of that was actually genuine, because there was no way and something had to be wrong. He realized that, in truth, his question had been asked the wrong way, because there was a problem with the definition of antique. Who knew which era those antiques were from? Maybe they were not worth anything. Because of that, he needed to define a limit for the success rate. He asked what the success rate was of buying an antique worth more than 10,000. At that stall, the probability appeared as 0%. He decided to ask about something worth 5,000, and the probability also remained at 0%. But as he kept looking, he noticed that something from the Republic of China period was at 100%. He asked the seller how much that item cost. The seller said that he was a young man with very good taste, and that this was the most valuable antique, because Empress Dowager 6 had used it. Now, seeing that they were destined to meet, he offered it for 20,000. The protagonist prepared to leave, asking if that thing was trash, because he doubted it was worth 200, and the man was trying to trick him by trying to sell it for 20,000. The seller kept trying to sell it, asking the protagonist not to walk away, because he would give him a 50% discount, and offer it for 10,000, but Bayu simply ignored him, and continued walking away even faster, thinking that fraud existed everywhere, and it seemed that the value limit for antiques could not be too low, so he needed to set at least 10,000 as the limit. He went to another person's stall, and asked the golden finger what the success rate was of buying an antique worth 10,000. At that stall, the probability appeared as 10%. He decided to change the question, asking about 20,000, and the rate remained at 10%. He decided to raise it to 30,000, and the rate stayed at 10%. He was impressed because even at 50,000, it was still 10%, and maybe he could find a real treasure. The seller smiled and thought that perhaps he needed to give that rookie his first lesson. He began explaining that buying antiques required an accurate eye, and that he did business with integrity, never acting like some unscrupulous merchants who asked for absurd prices. He tried to push a vase onto the protagonist, saying that it was a good item, but the probability of that item being valuable was 0. So Bayu stopped him, saying that there was no need to recommend anything, because he had already chosen. Then he pointed at an antique that had a 100% probability of being worth 50,000. Bayu thought that he was not a rookie, dreaming of finding a hidden treasure, because with the success rate in his hands, he was the golden touch of the antique street, and would become the #1 master of antique appraisal. Because of that, the seller was witnessing the beginning of a true legend. The seller became a little confused, wondering what was going on, because that rookie was apparently blind. It was not just because something looked old that it meant it was actually old. That item was fake and had just come out of the kill. He wondered how he could raise the price of that piece of trash. BYU realized that the seller was acting strangely, and was definitely trying to take advantage of him and inflate the price, but this happened because he had shown interest too quickly, and he should not have done that. He had gotten carried away because of the success rate, and had become too excited. The seller said that he really had quite an appetite, but he should follow the advice of an expert seller. He asked him to take a look at that porcelain vase first, because buying antiques was about discernment first, and connection second. He could see a good connection between the two of them, and that was why he was giving him honest advice. He asked him to look at the glaze of that vase, the smooth molding, the purely handcrafted work, and the very clear sound which demonstrated its quality. He emphasized that it was not expensive, only 50,000, and if he managed to resell it, he would probably make a huge profit. Bayu made a satisfied expression to deceive the seller. He wondered how much that thing could be worth, and why the seller was looking at it that way, because he was not pushing the wine vessel, but recommending that broken vase instead, and he probably did not know that there really was a potential treasure worth 50,000. Their protagonist decided to refuse, saying that he also believed buying antiques was a matter of connection, and that porcelain vase was beautiful, but it had no connection with him. He held the wine vessel and said that he thought this vessel looked very good. The seller asked if he was really interested in that bronze wine vessel, and from the looks of it he had a good eye, because that was a discovery he had found in the countryside. For 8,000 if he really wanted it, he could sell it at cost price, and asked if he accepted the offer of 8,000. Not a cent more or less. The protagonist was tempted to accept, because compared with 50,000, 8,000 was just pocket change. And that seller seemed to have no idea of the true value of that bronze wine vessel. He asked the golden finger what the probability was that the seller knew its true value, and the probability appeared as 0%. Baiyu thought that he had expected that. With the success rate in his hands, all hidden intentions were within his reach. Because of that he could think a little about how to manipulate the negotiation and pretend to be a poor rookie. After all, no matter how sophisticated the quotes were, as long as he knew the final result, he would be invincible. Because of that, he would use the success rate to test the minimum price the seller would accept. He asked what the probability was that the seller would accept selling that vessel for 4,000, and the probability was 100%. That impressed him. 2,000 was also 100%. He decided to lower it to 1,000, and the probability dropped to 80%. He thought that it did not matter much, because he could not be too greedy, so he already knew what to do. He told the seller that 8,000 was a little expensive, and asked if they could make it a bit cheaper. The seller thought that he had bought many things for a very low price, and no matter how cheaply he sold it, the profit would still be huge. He told the protagonist that 8,000 for such a good item really was not expensive. However, a connection with someone who also understood things was more important, so the protagonist could choose the price. Baiwu offered 2,000. The seller was surprised, thinking that this boy really was bargaining hard, but 2,000 was still a huge profit. Since the seller had fallen silent, Baiwu decided to push a little more, and asked if he really would not accept the 2,000, because if not, then they should just forget about this conversation. The seller finally gave in, and said that 2,000 was a great price. In truth, he had bought 2 items for 8,000, and sold the other one to a beautiful lady yesterday. He quickly packed the vessel, and handed it to the protagonist, who transferred the payment. Baiwu left laughing, thinking that he had made a true fortune. The seller also smiled widely, because he had also managed to make a fortune, since he had paid an extremely low price for that thing, something worth only a few yuan sold for 2,000. That was very easy money selling trash. A rookie, trying to imitate professionals in finding treasures. That boy was too crazy. Because 2,000 was still a huge profit for him, he celebrated with the seller beside him, saying that yesterday, a lady had bought a wine vessel for 9,000, and now, that foolish boy had bought the other vessel for 2,000. The beer was not as smart as the seller, and that money had been very easy to earn. The other seller asked why he was showing off so much, and asked old Wang if that was not the young girl who bought the bronze wine pot for 9,000 yesterday, the one he had just tricked. Maybe she was there to cause trouble. Wang said that this really did not bring any trouble for him, because money and goods exchange were no longer a problem. As soon as the girl approached, Wang immediately began, saying that his was a small business, so all sales were final and there were no refunds. The girl was a little lost, and asked if he was going crazy, then asked where it was. Wang, who was also a little lost, asked what she meant. She asked where the other bronze wine vessel was, because she would pay 10,000 or, if he preferred, 50,000 for the wine vessel. Wang began trembling and asked how much she had said, questioning whether that wine vessel was really so valuable, and how that rookie could know something like that. The girl found his behavior a little strange, and thought that maybe the seller was trying to inflate the price, but since she really wanted that item, she asked if he truly thought it was not enough, because if he wanted, she could add a little more to the amount, and offered 60,000, but the seller did not answer, so she raised it to 80,000. The 2 sellers were surprised by this. The girl became irritated by getting no response at all, and asked the boss if he was not hearing what she was saying. Wang began beating his own chest, saying that the hunter had just been caught by the prey, and this was foolishness, because he had just lost 80,000. Another seller began laughing, saying that when it came to business, he had never bowed to anyone, but today he had truly learned something, because buying a pile of trash and selling it for 80,000 really was impressive. Wang asked if she would pay 100,000 for that vessel, and she accepted without hesitation, making the seller fall backward. The seller beside him told the young woman that he would like to say something, because old Wang had just sold the wine vessel, and asked if she could guess how much it had gone for, saying that it was for 2,000. because an old thing was sold for 2,000. The girl asked if it had really already been sold. Wang stood up and asked her to wait just a moment, because he would be right back. But suddenly he heard loud shouting up ahead. Something that was being sold for 300,000. The people were saying that the boy's luck was far too good, because old Li was offering 300,000 for that bronze wine vessel. The seller beside Wang said that people were talking about the bronze wine vessel, and maybe it was the same one they had been talking about. The woman became irritated, saying that this was a huge nuisance, questioning which brat had stolen her deal. With terrible luck, but Baiyu refused the amount of 300,000. The people became bothered, thinking that he was being too greedy. Old Li offered 400,000, saying that he would not go higher than that, but Baiyu refused again, and began putting away the bronze vessel. Li asked him not to be in such a hurry, and asked what price the protagonist wanted for it, because he would listen carefully. The protagonist said that apparently, this gentleman was an expert, so he as a young man humbly asked that they become friends, and offered a fixed price of 500,000. He said he would let the rest go, because he truly wanted to have his friendship. Li was impressed, and said that this was completely impressive, thanking him very much for the chance to meet him. Wang could not believe that his vessel was being sold for 500,000. The other people told Wang that they had heard that the boy had paid only 2,000 for that vase, and that regardless of who had sold it to him, that person was probably completely devastated. Right now they asked why he looked so sad. Wang asked how that could be possible, because he had been in that business for many years, so how could he have sold something so valuable for such a low price? The girl from before said that 500,000 was unacceptable, and offered 550,000. The protagonist looked at her, and thought that she had fair skin, a beautiful face, long legs, and that the appearance and temperament of that beauty were simply incredible. Her proud behavior showed that she was definitely a young lady from a wealthy family, a goddess of the world in the past. Perhaps he would not even have dared to look at her twice. Of course, with his current success rate, finding romance was as easy as drinking a glass of water. On the other hand, the girl was a little annoyed, wondering why that boy was looking at her, since he was nothing but a loser. After all, if her grandfather had not been so stubborn, and insisted that that wine vessel belonged to her, she would not have had to go through all that trouble. But she had to get it no matter how much it cost. Bai Wu looked at the wine pot, and thought that this girl also wanted the wine vessel 100%, which meant he could sell it for an even higher price than expected. He looked a little farther back, and saw the seller who had sold it to him, saying that apparently, the wine vessel he had sold for 2,000 was worth more than 550,000. As soon as the people heard that, they began mocking Wang, making him die of shame. The girl continued pressuring the protagonist, again offering 550,000, and asked whether he was going to sell it or not. Li told her that she was being a little unreasonable, because there was an old saying on those streets, whoever arrived first had to be the first to buy. The girl laughed, telling the old gentleman that the two of them had not made a deal yet, and the agreement was still open. Li thought that girl was quite annoying, and that her behavior seemed a little familiar to him. The two of them looked at the protagonist, but he laughed, saying that he was not the one who wanted to buy it, so the two of them could discuss the matter a little, and reach an agreement. The girl thought the protagonist was just another person, trying to use the rules of the antique market to inflate the price, and apparently, he really thought others were stupid enough not to see the little scheme he was trying to pull. Li offered 560,000, but the girl offered 570,000. The old man raised the offer again, and the young woman offered 600,000. Li looked at her, and said that she looked a little familiar, asking what her relationship was with old ghost D-Men. The girl said that D-Men was her grandfather, and asked if the old gentleman knew him. Li began laughing, saying that it was a case of mistaken identity. He emphasized that he was a friend of her grandfather, and that he had wanted her to buy that wine vessel. He formally introduced himself, saying that his name was Li Weiguo, a professor from the history department of Hangjun University. Just like her grandfather, she said that he must be Grandpa Li, her grandfather's childhood friend. She said that he was doing well, and went for a morning run every day. The protagonist became a little irritated, and interrupted the two, asking if they were still going to buy it. The young woman said yes, and asked Wei Guo to go back and take care, asking him to visit her grandfather for tea when he had time, because she would personally pick him up if needed. A short while later, she transferred the payment to the protagonist. He thought that, although the calculation had produced a small error, that profit margin was more than 300 times, and now he had become a millionaire overnight, and truly was the golden touch of Antique Street. Why should he write face-slapping novels when he was the real male protagonist of a comeback story? In this manhwa, he looked at her and became enchanted again, asking if she would like to exchange WeChat. She was a little surprised by that, The protagonist smiled, saying that apparently she was quite interested in antiques, and maybe if he found another good item nearby, he could contact her. Qingting thought that pickup line was extremely cheesy, because the protagonist was disgusting but funny. He was a true toad wanting to eat swan meat. He tried to use his charm and called her Diet too, but she stepped back asking why he had called her that. Diet meant little girl or something like that. She began wondering why he was trying to be so friendly. One stroke of luck in finding a treasure, and he already thought he was the chosen one. Anyone dared to try to get close to her. She became a little irritated, saying that he should not call her by name, as if he were older than her. The protagonist asked the golden finger what the success rate was, that she was older than him, and the probability was 0%. He began looking at her, thinking that she was truly worthy of being a pampered, arrogant and proud young lady. But he had the ultimate trump card of the success rate, and he would definitely show his abilities. He asked what the chance was that she was 20 years old, and the possibility was 100%. He thought that both he and she were 20 years old, but his birthday was September 30th, so hers could be. He asked if she was born in May, but that gave 0%. He became confused, wondering what was going on, because she was younger than him, but she had not been born in the last 3 months, so it could be a coincidence that they were both born on the same day, and that gave 100%. Qingting asked what game he was playing. BYU asked her not to rush. He continued making the calculations, thinking that he had been born at 3:23 in the afternoon, and she was younger than him, so she had been born between 9 o'clock and midnight, but the probability gave 0. He kept asking until he finally found out, and it was a huge coincidence. Only 1 minute of difference between the two of them, since she was trying to act like an older sister and dominate him with her presence. Now he would break her spirit. Qingting became a little irritated, saying that he was completely inexplicable, and began walking away. But Baiwu called her Diato again, telling her not to think he was talking nonsense. He thought that he would only give her an appetizer. To scare her, he closed his eyes, pretending to concentrate, saying that she was turning 20 that year, and was born at the end of September. Asking if that was right, she was impressed, asking how he knew that. The protagonist said that it was very easy, because he had calculated it, but that made her even more irritated, thinking that the arrogance on that boy's face was unbearable, because he was trying to talk metaphysics with her. She continued ignoring him, saying that he was just trying to put on a mystical act, and continued walking away. But the protagonist thought that he had something even more precise and surprising. He said that it was very easy. He just needed to calculate again, and emphasized that she was born on September 30th, around 3:30 in the afternoon. This made her freeze, asking how he could do that. Everyone was impressed, asking if that was really true, because that boy was saying it with great precision, and they questioned whether it was really possible that he knew fortune-telling. Others said that judging by the girl's reaction, he had probably hit the mark. But on the other hand, some people also became irritated, saying that he was trying to sell divination in the 21st century because that young man had probably collected her information earlier to hit on her, and that was just perverted behavior. By Wu simply remained silent, thinking that a pervert would not be able to discover such details, because now he could show his true ability. He told her that he would calculate again, emphasizing that she had not been born at 3:30, but at 3:24. He thought that now it was time to deliver the final blow, saying that she had been born on September 30th, in the afternoon at 3 o'clock. She was so surprised by this, that she took out her phone with trembling hands, and called her mother, who answered worriedly. Asking what was wrong, she asked her mother exactly what time she had been born. Her mother said that she had been born around 3:30 in the afternoon on September 30th, but became a little confused, asking if she really did not remember her own birthday. But Qingting said that was not it, and asked her to be a little more specific, questioning whether she had been born at 3:24. Her mother said that she also did not remember, and that she would immediately check the birth certificate in the safe. 3 minutes later, her mother returned, and said that she had been born at 3 o'clock. Her mother was so impressed that she asked how she knew that. However, Qingting was even more shocked after discovering it. She stared at the protagonist Bai Wu, called her Diato again, and said that if she wanted to know something, she only needed to ask, because staring at him like that made him a little shy. But Qingting only turned around angrily, saying that she should not have become curious and wasted her time with that boy. The protagonist stepped in front of her and apologized, saying that he was joking, because he had only made a divination earlier. She smiled angrily and tapped the protagonist's chest with her finger, saying that he had been precise, even getting the seconds right, so how could he call that just divination? She questioned whether he really thought she was stupid. Bai Wu only became even more enchanted, thinking that she was truly a goddess-level beauty, and even when she was angry, she was incredibly beautiful. BYU apologized, and said that he would tell the truth from then on, emphasizing that he really had calculated it. Qingting asked if he was a fortune teller or a scammer. The protagonist said that not all seers were scammers, and asked if she had not seen the methods he had used. He moved closer to her, and whispered that if he was not mistaken, she was wearing black today. This made her even more shocked. Telling him to stop talking, she looked at him angrily, and the protagonist wondered whether it was possible that she had never had a boyfriend before. The probability of that appeared as 100%. Qingting asked what he was looking at, and told him not to get so close. BYU thought that based on his years of seclusion, that girl did not like men and was not dating. So, who knew what the chances were that she was a lesbian? The probability of that appeared as 100%, and the protagonist said that could not be, because lesbians were infinitely wonderful. Qingting became embarrassed and began trembling, asking what he had said. Everyone around them was surprised looking at her, and the protagonist laughed, saying that he had said exactly what she understood. She ran over and pulled him into a corner. As soon as they reached an alley, she pushed him against the wall and placed her foot beside him, asking how he knew about her relationship with another girl. BYU only said that he had calculated that too, and she said it was nonsense. The protagonist asked if she really did not believe him, and moved even closer, saying that he could even calculate that she had 3 moles, so calculating someone's sexual orientation was very easy for him. Qingting could not even say anything against that. She decided to add him as a and the protagonist said that everything was fine now, and that if he found anything good, he would contact her again. But before leaving, he emphasized that she could also ask for divinations or consultations as he walked away. He thought that the success rate really was incredible, because with it he could even guess people's secrets. But he really had not expected to meet a lesbian, and end up exposing her accidentally. With the success rate as he was walking, he saw Weiguo making a phone call, and wondered who he was calling. Could it be that he had heard all of that? He asked the success rate what the probability was of Qingting being discovered by her family. For being a lesbian, the probability appeared as 0%, but the success rate began to change, rising to 20%. He was confused, and asked again whether she had been discovered or not, until he suddenly had a great idea. Maybe this change had been because of his interaction with that girl. He continued looking at Weiguo, and thought that this could not be right, asking the success rate if it was possible that the old man was contacting her family to tell them everything. The probability went to 100%, and the protagonist thought that he had not done it on purpose. She was still standing in the alley, and received the protagonist's message, saying that her secret had probably already been discovered by her family. She was frightened by this and ran to the side, trying to find the protagonist, but she could not see him. She sent a message asking what he meant by that. He asked the success rate if her parents would contact her within half an hour, and the probability appeared as yes. He decided to lower it to 5 minutes, and the probability also went to 100%. He sent her a message, saying that he had just made another divination, and congratulated her, saying that in 5 minutes, her family would call her for a conversation. 5 minutes later, her phone really rang. As soon as she answered, her mother told her to come back immediately, because she and her father wanted to ask her some questions. Bayu took a deep breath, and said that from the looks of it, she would have to explain herself properly. In truth, parents were always golden love, always free love, just like he had left home alone, with the success rate in his hands. That was just a mantra for others, but his realm was already different. It was a pity to meet a beautiful girl, but be unable to flirt with her. Suddenly his phone also began ringing. As soon as he answered, he asked his mother why she was calling him so suddenly, and if something had happened. But the protagonist was surprised to discover what she wanted. Because she wanted to arrange a blind date, he became irritated, saying that he was only 20 years old, and she already wanted him to go on a blind date, and he refused. But as always, his mother ended up convincing him. At 8:15 at night, he was already at the restaurant, thinking that as a true gentleman, he needed to be polite and arrive a little early. He looked at the girl's photo, and thought that with her mature and charming behavior, she must have many admirers, so why would she need a blind date? As soon as the woman entered, the protagonist looked over and saw Qingting, looking a little uncomfortable, following a woman. He was surprised, asking what she was doing there too, and who was calling him, wondering if it could be what he was thinking. The success rate said that the blind date was with Qingting's partner, and the rate of that was 100%. He asked if this blind date could also be a chain reaction, caused by him accidentally exposing her, and the probability was 100%. He looked at the scene, and said that one wanted to break up, and the other wanted to reconcile. The plot was getting melodramatic. Qingting's girlfriend or ex-girlfriend looked at the protagonist, and asked Qingting to let go of her arm, making her cry. Bai Wu was startled, because that girl's gaze could kill him. The girl walked over to Baiwu and introduced herself, saying that her name was Muir. She said that she found the protagonist very good and handsome, and said that she would like to be with him. Everyone around them was surprised by such a declaration. Even him on the other hand. Ching King was heartbroken, crying for her companion. Baiwu looked at Ching King and said that this was very confusing. Yer asked if he did not like her. The protagonist tried to explain, saying that it was not that, because she really was beautiful and excellent in every way, but he thought that a honey trap must have appeared. There Yer moved even closer to him and said that she was being very serious, that this was not a joke, and hugged him. He asked the success rate if it was sure that this was not a trap, and the probability appeared as 0%. He said that he always felt this was not a happy event that had fallen from the sky. Yer pushed him, looked into his eyes, and suddenly kissed the protagonist, making poor Ching King feel like complete trash. Yer fell onto Baiwu and called him to go. He asked where they were going, and she said that he was going to her house to meet her parents. Ching Ting ran away. Baiwu thought that Yer clearly was not willing, and although this was not a trap for him, she was probably using him as a shield to make Ching Ting give up. The success rate said that this was 100% correct. Baiwu thought that although he had also benefited, being manipulated by her for no reason was a little unpleasant. The two stared at each other, and the atmosphere did not become pleasant at all. In addition, the protagonist thought that if he did not have the success rate, how would he know she was a lesbian? Not saying anything was also deceiving people. Yer stood up and asked whether he was coming or not. Baiwu was a little confused and asked if she really wanted to take him to meet her parents. The success rate was 100%. He continued to be suspicious, questioning whether this was serious, whether she really was not just using him as a shield, whether she really wanted a date or a boyfriend, or whether she was only making him meet her parents as her boyfriend to calm the situation a little. Every question gave a success rate of 100%. Yer called him with tears in her eyes, turned around and asked what he wanted, because he had already taken advantage of the situation, and now was really going to give up. The protagonist became a little irritated, thinking that this was very annoying. She was beautiful enough to do whatever she wanted, so should he not be the one gaining the advantage? In all of this, he noticed that she was crying, and became a little sentimental, saying that he did not regret what had happened. However, he was a little bothered, because he had not even agreed to go out with her, and he wondered why. All the girls he wanted to flirt with a little were lesbians, but he did not know what she was thinking. Sometime later at her house, as soon as they arrived, she called her father and mother, saying that she had arrived. Her mother appeared irritated, saying that she was supposed to be on a blind date, so why had she already come back? But Yer introduced Baiwu, saying that he was her boyfriend. The protagonist greeted her, however he was a little apprehensive, thinking that his soft heart had gotten the better of him, and that he had been dragged to that house without even making a decision, and now he did not know what to do. He wondered whether taking on another hot potato also counted as rescuing a damsel in distress. Her mother quickly changed her attitude, and began smiling, asking if she really had a boyfriend, and why she had not said so before. Suddenly another person in the room shouted, asking if that had really happened. The protagonist was completely startled, thinking that with all that commotion, apparently someone was coming over with a knife in hand. As soon as her father arrived, he grabbed Baiwu by the arm, saying that the young man seemed quite lively. Yer said that actually they had dated in high school, but broke up because of their studies, and she had not expected to meet him again. At a blind date, her father stared at the protagonist, and her mother was happy, saying that now she understood why her grades had dropped a little during her final year. Her father dragged the protagonist away, asking why they were talking about that, and told him to come in quickly. He asked his wife to prepare some of her best special dishes that night. As he was being dragged, the protagonist realized that the two of them were so enthusiastic that if he had not known beforehand, he would have thought this could be a honey trap. Her father took the two of them to a room and told the protagonist that they could sit there for a while, because he and his wife would prepare some dishes for them to eat. As soon as he left the room, Baiwu asked if she really was that man's biological daughter, and the probability was 100%. The two began laughing, and suddenly her mother entered the room. Her father quickly came back, asking his wife what she was doing, and pushed her aside, saying that the two of them could continue freely with whatever they had been doing, then closed the door again. In the hallway they could hear her father speaking loudly and enthusiastically to his wife, saying that tonight they needed to prepare a soup that would give that young man vigor. She became a little embarrassed by this, saying that this was the first time her parents had met her boyfriend, and maybe they were a little too excited. The protagonist was a little confused, because apparently that girl's parents had become extremely enthusiastic and proactive on the very first visit. Outside the room, both her father and mother were trying to listen to what was happening inside, but her father was a little bothered, asking why there was no movement, because he had clearly taught that young man that a great opportunity was right in front of him. but her mother became a little worried, asking the father if he really was not afraid that the young man would become so greedy that he would take advantage of their poor daughter. But the father ran over to her and covered her mouth, telling her to speak a little more quietly, because if she did not take a risk, the bear cub could not catch the bear. He held a cleaver, thinking that they would not know whether it was fake or real without trying. In addition, they did not need to worry because he was prepared. If that guy dared to do anything, he would go in. The protagonist tried to get closer to her, but she stepped back a little frightened. Baiwu explained that he only wanted to sit down and chat with her for a while, but you're still frightened by that situation. Apologized and said that maybe she still needed some to adapt to the new relationship. The protagonist moved a little farther away and said that maybe he had been a little presumptuous. And if she really was nervous about that situation, then he could give her a little more space. She was a little surprised, thanked him and said that it was fine, saying that she could do it and would work hard to adapt. BYU thought that Year really was a beautiful woman, with no bad angles, and if only she were truly his girlfriend, things would be better. He decided to ask his ability what the success rate would be if he held her hand now, and the answer was 80%. He decided to ask about a hug, and the possibility dropped to 76%. He thought that maybe he had saved the galaxy, but soon pushed that thought out of his head, thinking that she only wanted a fake boyfriend to deceive her parents. Besides, he was a healthy, morally upright, excellent single young man, so how could he do something like that? He thought that he could not get involved in that mess, and that it would be better if the girl could face herself honestly. He tried to move closer to hold her hand, but ended up tripping and falling. Her father quickly entered, shouting and asking what was wrong and if she was okay. But as soon as he saw the situation, he was surprised and Year shouted, asking her father what he was doing there. Her mother tried to smooth things over and scolded her husband, telling her daughter that it was good to see she was perfectly fine, because her father got scared very easily. By Wu asked why he was holding a cleaver in his hands. This made him even more worried, questioning what was going on, because he had done nothing and had been dragged into this for no reason. So why was the man entering with a cleaver in his hands? He took a deep breath, saying that he had not changed his mind, but suddenly realized that her father clearly did not believe he was dating his daughter. The wife scolded her husband, asking if he was crazy because they were only testing whether he was a substitute. So why had her father entered with a cleaver in his hand? He explained that he was just a little afraid, because even if that boy was only a substitute, he could be used and try to do something more. Meanwhile, the protagonist remained confused, because he had been inexplicably dragged there to pretend to be a boyfriend, and had almost been treated by her parents like a pervert. No one would believe this plot twist if he told someone about it. Year asked if he was okay. The protagonist looked at her, thinking that even so, in the end this was a family matter, and he preferred not to play this role anymore. It was better to leave while he could. He stood up and looked at her, saying that they could discuss this in more detail later, because it was already getting late. Year tried to stop the protagonist, asking if he really wanted to go back on his word now, but Baiyu remained serious, and asked if she really believed that a small act could deceive her parents, because he was already making it clear that he no longer wanted to cooperate with this performance. They were doing this because they cared about her, but she only wanted to use him to deceive them. He emphasized that open communication with her parents was the best way to solve problems. Year was surprised by this, and held the protagonist's arm, asking if he really could help her at least this once. BYU smiled, seeing that now he was the one holding the cards there. Suddenly the two of them began speaking very loudly, and her father and mother became worried. Her father asked why it seemed like the two were arguing. Her mother was a little happy, saying that only young couples argued, and that this was all her father's fault for calling him a substitute. But suddenly she realized that maybe it was because her husband had scared the protagonist with the knife, and they had started arguing. Now they needed to think of a way, because young couples always broke up after arguing. They tried to run to the room, but the protagonist opened the door and came out with a serious face, without saying anything as he walked. He thought that he could no longer stay there, because this situation was not helping that girl, but harming her. Her mother ran over to the protagonist, telling him not to put on his shoes, because she had accidentally gotten them wet while preparing the soup. Baiyu was surprised by this when he saw that his shoes really were wet. Year came out of the room and asked her mother how exactly the soup she had been preparing in the kitchen had spilled there. Her father said that was exactly right, saying that his wife was being very careless. He told the protagonist that his shoes were wet and asked how he was going to go home. The mother suggested that he spend the night there until his shoes dried the next day. BYU thought that he had explained everything clearly to Year. Now how she would face it depended only on her. Her father also looked at the protagonist and asked why he could not stay there that night, but BYU looked at them and said that he needed to go to the hospital to take care of a patient, because the son of his 7th great-aunt's niece was sick, so he needed to say goodbye. Both the father and mother became a little confused after that entire explanation about aunt-daughter and everything else. A short while later, the protagonist was lying in his bed, thinking that making money was much more reliable, because as long as he kept making money, he would stay happy, so he needed to go back to buy more antiques tomorrow. The next morning, Wang was cleaning his artifacts, thinking that he had been careless and lost money to a rookie, so he needed to find a great opportunity now. He noticed that someone had stopped in front of his shop and looked up with a smile on his face, asking if there was anything the person liked in the store. But when he looked forward, he saw that it was the protagonist. Baiwu asked if he had gone to the countryside to collect a few more antiques. Wang smiled and told the protagonist that he had arrived at the perfect time, because he had managed to get more antiques overnight, and asked if he would like to take a look. He thought that with every product he bought, he would be able to make an absurd profit. Baiwu asked Wang to show him what interesting things he had. He pointed to some items, saying that this was what he had bought in a village overnight, and that he had spent 50,000 to buy that porcelain set. In addition, he emphasized that he had specifically asked the villagers for information, and heard that the family had prospered with Li Shimin during the late Sui dynasty, and flourished during the era of Empress Wu, so those few porcelain pieces could be buy. We asked if it was Tang Sunkoi. Wang said that was exactly right, whether it was the craftsmanship, glaze or other aspects. Those few porcelain pieces were very likely Tang Sunkoi. And considering that the protagonist was an old customer, they could make a good deal. Baiwu asked how much he was selling those pieces for. Wang said 60 and asked what he thought of that price. The protagonist made a surprised expression and said that the seller really was incredible, because he was charging only 60 for that porcelain set. In addition, he thought that the porcelain set truly had very good workmanship, because even buying it from a porcelain factory would cost 200. Wang tried to explain that it was not quite like that, and that the protagonist had probably misunderstood something, but Baiwu interrupted the seller, saying that he did not need to explain, because 60 really was very cheap. And if he bought all those porcelain pieces for 60, his conscience would not be at peace. Wang said that Baiwu was touching his heart. The protagonist offered a new deal, because he would not like Wang to lose so much money. He wanted to think for a bit and give a fairer price for it. He asked the golden finger if those porcelain pieces were truly genuine, but the probability appeared as only 14.28%, and the protagonist thought that this was expected, because all of them were fake. But suddenly, he realized that he had calculated it wrong. If it appeared as 14.28%, that meant 1 out of 7, so maybe among the 7 porcelain pieces, there was one true antique. And if that piece was real, its value would be tens of millions. The golden finger said that it was 100% genuine, and the probability of its value reaching tens of millions was 90%. The protagonist finished checking, and told the seller to give him a real price, asking how much that set cost. Wang thought that this time he had hit the jackpot, and said that for only 600,000, he could take the entire set. Byu asked if that really was the price. The seller said that if he really thought it was too expensive, he could give him a discount, and set the price at 500,000. Baiwu said that price was great, and that he would make the transfer now. He quickly transferred 500,000, took all the pieces and ran off. Wang found all of that very suspicious, and wondered if there really was a genuine piece among that porcelain set. However, he soon changed his mind, thinking that it was impossible, because that porcelain set had been sold wholesale from the shelves of the Tong Sunko workshop. In that mountain village, he became happy, thinking that young people nowadays really thought they were the lucky protagonists of novels. After all, it was basically impossible to find such a rare and genuine piece at any street stall, and from the looks of it, that boy was still too young to understand that selling that set for 500,000, when he had bought everything for only 1,500, was very easy money, and the rookie was still just a rookie, playing around with him. Suddenly, a car drove straight into the middle of that shop. A girl got out of the car and called Wang, saying that the Tang Sunkoi imitation she had sold him for 1,500 the night before, she now wanted to buy back for 1 million. Upon hearing this, Wang realized that he had once again lost a winning ticket. The girl kept begging and explained that one of the porcelain pieces in that set was very important to her grandfather, and was not for sale, so she wanted to buy it back. Wang explained that it was not that he did not want to sell it, but that he had already packed it up and sold it to someone else. The seller beside him said that was right, and questioned how that old man had managed to deceive that boy. In truth, the boy had spent 500,000 on that new item from some craft workshops, and was a complete idiot. He emphasized that he envied Wang, asking when he would also find someone that naive. Wang said it was normal for young people to be impatient. The girl began crying, saying that everything was over now. She thought that just to play at eating chicken, she had placed that porcelain piece on the shelf, and it ended up being sold. Now she was doomed. And today was the day her intelligence hit rock bottom. Wang tried to comfort her, asking her not to cry, although that porcelain piece was a proud creation of her grandfather. In the end it was a replica. Because of that, she only had to apologize to her grandfather, and everything would be fine. But the girl became irritated, asking who said it was only a replica. In that porcelain set one piece was genuine, passed down by her family. Someone had once offered 10 million for it, but her grandmother had not sold it, because she had been reluctant to part with it. At the time Wang could not believe it. The seller beside him began mocking him again, saying that Wang had truly been incredible. Because yesterday, he had sold a bronze wine vessel worth 600,000 for only 2,000, and today, unfortunately, he had let a genuine product worth 10 million go for only 500,000. The girl asked where the guy who bought the porcelain had gone. Wang said that he had gone toward Guyuan Pavilion. Meanwhile, inside the pavilion, the protagonist was already having the item examined. The appraiser said that the expression was vivid, and the glaze was complete, meaning that it was in excellent condition. The man analyzing it said that he had a camel in that shape inside his house exactly like that piece, and that it was extremely rare for a 1,000-year-old porcelain piece to be so identical. He emphasized that the protagonist had said Wang had sold it to him because he had thought his granddaughter had secretly taken it out to sell. The protagonist thought that Tang Sun Koi had been passed down from the Tang dynasty and was exactly the same item that the man was calling his. Maybe that item belonged to the old man. The golden finger said yes, giving a possibility of 100%. Bai Wu almost choked to death because of that. The old man became startled and asked what was wrong. Because he had accidentally burned himself. Bai Wu wondered to himself if it was possible that the item had been stolen by the seller, but the probability of that was 0. The protagonist became worried, because if it was not the seller, then perhaps the old man's granddaughter had sold it to the seller. The probability of that appeared as 100%. Bai Wu looked at the old man, while thinking that apparently he had raised a prodigy granddaughter. The old man explained that that piece would probably sell for 12 million at auction. However, he said that if the protagonist did not mind, he would like to buy that piece for 9 million, and asked if he found that acceptable. BYU thought that 9 million was not a small amount. Besides, that piece had originally belonged to someone else. BYU accepted the offer, saying that he would do as the gentleman wished. The old man took a card from his pocket and handed it to the protagonist, saying that it was his business card, and that if he found any good items in the future, he could contact him at any time. BYU thanked him and left the pavilion. While looking at the old man's name, which was Xie Yongkang, the girl ran out of the car, and the protagonist was startled to see that she was running so fast that she could fall at any moment. He saw that the probability of her falling was 100%, and stopped it from happening, asking her to slow down and be a little more careful, so she would not fall. She said that her name was Xie Zizi, and that she would never fall, and that pickup line was so stupid that it made her wonder if he had been a lifelong virgin, a true Iron Man. The protagonist said that this was good intentions, being mistaken for bad will, and he was only trying to warn her. He thought that this girl really did not appreciate kindness, but suddenly remembered that her name was Xie Zizi. He asked the golden finger if she was that prodigy granddaughter of the old man who had sold her family's treasure. The probability appeared as 100%, and he thought that it really was a coincidence to find her right there. Zizi continued walking quickly, ended up tripping over a stone, and definitely fell into the protagonist's arms. She was startled, asking what kind of trick that guy had used, and how she had really fallen. The people around them became uncomfortable, saying that society's morals were in decline, and told them not to be so unrestrained in broad daylight because that was indecent. Zizi became embarrassed, and asked the protagonist to let her go quickly, so she could continue on her way. But Bai Wu opened his hands, saying that she should be the only person letting go there, because she was completely clinging to him. Upon realizing this, she stepped away, and Bai Wu said that if they had nothing else to discuss, he would leave right away. But she shouted for him to stop. The protagonist raised his hands, saying that he had not done anything, and asked her not to try to extort him. She took his phone, saying that he was very lucky, because she needed to handle some urgent matters, so he had to leave his contact information, so she could settle things with him next time. Bai Yu thought that he had only kindly helped her stand up. He looked at the phone, and realized that she had added him as a friend. He began walking, thinking that he had not expected to meet a girl there, and have her at him, but now that he had money, he dared to spend a little more extravagantly, wondering whether he should buy a car or a house first. Wang asked the protagonist who he had sold that porcelain to, and how much he had managed to sell it for. BYU said that he had sold it to Boss J for 9 million. Wang only said that it was fine. The protagonist thought that the fat man really seemed impressive, remaining so unshaken. After losing such a huge amount of money, Wang only smiled, saying that he would still deal with that brat properly. Zizi looked at her grandfather and realized that the piece was already with him. She thought that now it was already done, and it was better to make a quick escape. But her grandfather noticed that she was there and shouted, ordering her to stop hiding and come in right away. Yang was looking at his unique piece, sold for 200 and bought back for 9 million. He asked his granddaughter why she had time to visit her old grandfather. However, the news was very good, and he emphasized that he had just bought something excellent. Zizi became even more frightened, thinking that she had not managed to arrive in time, and her grandfather had ended up buying that item back. This was extremely unlucky. Yang asked what was going on, because she was acting strangely. The girl became scared, saying that it was nothing, but the old man already knew that expression. He remembered that the last time she had acted that way was when she had sold his precious porcelain for 10 win. She became even stranger, and the old man looked at the item he had just bought. Then he looked at her surprised and began connecting the facts, saying that she had been at his house last night. Zizi ran away shouting to her grandfather that she was not feeling well and needed to go to the hospital right now. But the old man stood up angrily, ordering her to stop as she ran. She was calling her grandmother to save her because her grandfather was being too mean. Young Kong was almost catching her, telling her to think carefully about what she had just done. But before he could do anything, her grandmother shouted at him through the phone, asking why he was yelling at her precious granddaughter, because he was almost 80 years old and still lost his temper with just a child. Zizi took the opportunity and ran away, while asking herself who had acted so quickly that they had stopped her from buying it back before her grandfather found out. But she stopped and began thinking that she had just left the pavilion, and the only person who had left was that guy who had predicted that she would fall, which meant his eyesight was very good. Somewhere else, the protagonist felt as if someone was talking about him. He wondered if that greasy seller, who had been acting strangely, had decided to try to frame him. The probability appeared, saying that the attempt to frame him was 100%. But Baiyu was not too worried about that. He asked the Golden Finger whether he would be framed, whether someone would send a person to deal with him, or whether that seller would keep collecting junk to try to deceive him. His ability said that the probability of the seller continuing to try to deceive him was 100%, but the protagonist was happy about that, because with his success rate, he was basically invincible. However, finding treasure depended entirely on luck, and even with his powers, there might not be any treasure on Antique Street. If it had not been for Zijiao's carelessness, he would not have earned several million. In addition, he thought that mistakenly selling an antique for only 200 was a very bold move, and the world of the rich was truly difficult to understand. However, he realized something and thought that this could not be right, because the girls he had met recently were all strange. For safety's sake, he thought it would be better not to get involved with ZZ, not to mention that he still had to consider what to do if he could not find any treasure. But while thinking about all of this, he had a bold idea. He asked the Golden Finger if it was possible to find a treasure in the antique market tomorrow, and the probability was 100%. The protagonist became happy, thinking that this was just as expected, because he could even predict in advance whether he would find something or not. Earning tens of millions a day was a dream becoming reality. He looked at a car parked beside him, thinking that he could not help showing off when luck was favoring him. After all, a real man should have a good car, and that bus stop should take him to the automobile market. As soon as he arrived at the bus stop, he noticed that ZZ was also there, and found that a little suspicious. Suddenly he received a notification on his phone. That girl was asking what she should give her grandfather as an apology, because she did not dare to go home with him. So angry Baiwu thought that girl was a little foolish. But he noticed a strange man beside her, and asked the Golden Finger if it was possible that he was a thief. The probability was 50%. The man began moving closer and closer, and the protagonist received confirmation that the bus pervert had appeared, with a probability of 100%. He sent her a message, saying that the man in the black overcoat beside her did not seem like a good person, and that she had better be careful. Both she and the thug were startled, and she looked to the side, questioning why the protagonist was also there, and always saying something despicable. She replied to the message saying that it was him again, and said that this was very unlucky. The protagonist became irritated, saying that once again, his good deeds had been mistaken for bad intentions, and insulted the girl, saying that she was ungrateful, and emphasizing that he did not care what would happen. Suddenly the bus arrived, announcing the northern route of the city, and the passengers who were boarding first needed to move toward the back, The man behind ZZ touched her shoulder. She looked a little irritated, and the man pulled his hand back laughing. Then apologized, saying that he had lost his balance because of the crowd. ZZ simply ignored the situation and went back to using her phone. The protagonist looked at that situation and thought, that girl really did not understand anything. While the man prepared to grab her again, BYU saw that and thought that this was expected, and he needed to do something. Because that girl was very good, and he could not simply ignore a woman being touched against her will. He began walking toward the man and shouted at him, but before he could do anything, ZZ struck the pervert, then grabbed him by the arm and kicked his most sensitive area. BYU was frightened by what he was seeing, but she continued beating that guy, throwing him hard onto the ground in front of everyone. The other people were a little confused, not understanding what was happening there. ZZ shouted, a little embarrassed, that the man had been deliberately trying to touch her. BYU was startled, thinking that the structure of that girl was proportional to her agility and that she could be some kind of mixed martial artist, but ZZ was truly interested in figuring out how that unlucky guy had managed to predict that she would be attacked again, because he seemed more precise than her when judging people and things. This was a little strange. BYU, frightened by her strength, thought that this time it was over for him, because if she knew that he had bought the Tong Senkai, he would probably be dead right now. He said that he needed to get rid of that girl quickly. It was only 2 stops to the automobile market, so that should take only a few minutes, but the Golden Finger said that the probability of that was 0%. The protagonist was a little shocked, asking what was going on and why the bus would not take only a few minutes to reach his destination. This was extremely unlucky. As he got on the bus, he looked at her, thinking that today he was very unlucky, and questioned whether there could be a traffic jam or traffic accident, but the probability for both appeared as 0%. Because of that, he thought that he had a bad feeling about what was going to happen. He asked if it could be some criminal, because this was too bizarre. The Golden Finger said that the probability of a criminal kidnapping was 0%. Criminal hostage taking was also 0%. But the probability of a criminal setting a fire was 100%, and the probability of the criminal already being on the bus was also 100%. The protagonist became desperate, asking what he should do, because the criminal was already inside the bus, and if he acted rashly, he would definitely make the criminal even more cautious. If the criminal succeeded, everyone inside the bus would be finished, but if he tried to stop the arson, the success rate would probably be 0%. Even without calculating, since time was extremely urgent, he decided to call the police immediately. He called the police dispatch center and said that he wanted to report a crime because there was a criminal who intended to set a bus on fire. The police asked him to provide the exact location. BYU gave the bus number and said that it had just arrived at the antique market stop and that the next stop was the automobile trade city. He emphasized that there were people on the bus and the criminal was among them. The dispatcher said that they understood everything exactly and that they were initiating an emergency response. He asked the police to hurry because the criminal was carrying -1 to 9 liters of gasoline and setting fire to the bus along the way could cause casualties. However, the dispatcher began questioning how the protagonist had discovered this and whether he had any proof. BYU thought that now it was completely over, because he had been too focused on using the success rate to calculate. The dispatcher continued speaking to him, asking if he was sure about this, and how he knew that there was a criminal intending to set fire to the bus, and how he had confirmed that the person was carrying -1 to 9 liters of gasoline, and how he knew that the criminal intended to set the fire. Between those 2 stops, BYU became desperate, thinking that he really had no proof, and wondered whether he should say that he had superpowers, because even then no one would believe him. He saw the bus closing his doors and starting to move, so he hung up the phone thinking that it was too late. Although the police had been notified, he still needed to find that criminal. But right behind him, ZZ also got on the bus, and he asked why she was there, wondering if it was possible that she was trying to cause trouble for him, because this was a matter of life and death. But ZZ only smiled. The protagonist thought this was not good, because if that girl became obsessed with him again, it would bring a lot of trouble. Because of that, he needed to find the criminal quickly. He received a call from the police department, and as soon as he answered, the officer said that they had contacted an off-duty police officer who was on that bus, and he would monitor the protagonist closely, as well as the situation on the bus. However, if the protagonist confirmed that there was a criminal there, for his own safety he should act normally. BYU felt a little more relieved. After hearing that there was a police officer there, he looked back and saw ZZ staring at him. He looked forward again and thought that the police officer did not know who the criminal was, so how could he subdue the criminal? Because of that, he needed to think of a way to solve this situation. The criminal was probably sitting down. The Golden Finger said that the probability of the criminal being seated was 100%, but the probability of him being seated in the front half of the bus was 0%, while the probability of him being seated in the back was 100%. Bai-Wu started heading toward the back of the bus, but the girl kept following him. Bai-Wu questioned why she was following him, while he was looking for a criminal, carrying approximately 9 liters of gasoline, because this was no joke. As he looked at the passengers, he noticed something strange, and thought that it would be difficult to bring that amount of gasoline onto the bus. The criminal had probably divided it into drink bottles, or something like that, which meant he should be carrying a bag. The man right in front of him was acting strangely, hugging a bag. Bai-Wu thought that it was that guy, because he was holding the bag very tightly. However, before he could get any closer, the man began opening the bag. The protagonist thought that he had been too hasty, and made him feel that something was wrong, or maybe he was going to act a little earlier, but either way it was too late now. Bai-Wu stayed there anxiously, thinking about how to reduce the man's suspicion, or whether it would be better to simply attack and quickly stop him. Zizi grabbed the protagonist's shoulder and told him to keep hiding. Bai-Wu looked back and thought that this time he was sorry, but that officer was probably watching him closely. The golden finger said that the probability of that was 100%. He turned to her and called her grandma, saying that he had been wrong, because he really had not thought she was a flat-chested brute. He told her not to follow him anymore, because he was an innocent young man. He had been thinking that this situation was very urgent, and he needed to use her to distract the criminal, and then find an opportunity to act. That way he could also alert the police officer, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The criminal was distracted by that argument, and the protagonist thought that this was a good opportunity. Zizi prepared to throw a punch, and asked why the protagonist was no longer running. He pretended that he was going to dodge the blow, saying that this was all a misunderstanding, and grabbed the criminal's bag. Making it open, the criminal stood up angrily and asked what he was doing. Bai-Wu saw that the man was truly cautious, and it was possible that he had been trained. But suddenly Zizi punched the man in the face. The protagonist was surprised, while she continued beating him, and quickly subdued him in front of everyone. Bai-Wu asked if she was Superwoman, but Zizi took out her handcuffs and said that this was police business, and now the criminal was under arrest. She picked up one of the bottles and smelled it, saying that it really was gasoline. Bai-Wu could not believe that she really was an officer of the law. Already outside the bus, Zizi said that everything was done, and looked at the protagonist, saying that she would report that he was the one who called it in, and now he needed to explain how he knew. The protagonist thought that this girl was very troublesome, and she kept chasing him. It was better to avoid problems than create them, so he needed to think of some way to get out of this. He looked at her, and said that she should keep this a secret, because in truth, he was a humble person who could predict the future. If she did not believe what he was saying, she only needed to think about the events that had happened before. Zizi thought that in truth, that guy was a little unlucky. The protagonist was frightened by her reaction. He thought that he was in big trouble, because he really could not speak carelessly, or eat him properly. Now he could no longer escape this, and needed to think of something very quickly. Zizi became irritated and punched the wall, saying that he was still pretending to be stupid, and questioned again how he knew. The protagonist became frightened, and asked what she wanted to know. Zizi said that a helpful citizen happened to pass by, and discovered a criminal who intended to set a bus on fire. Bai-Wu lowered her hand, saying that there was no need to thank him, because as a helpful citizen, that was his duty. But she continued irritated, saying that from the looks of it, he would not cry until he saw the coffin. She pressed him against the wall, saying that she remembered very clearly that he had not entered the bus when he called the police. In addition, he did not know the criminal, but he knew that the man was carrying -1 to 9 liters of gasoline. The people around them began getting curious, looking at that situation. The protagonist kept disguising it, saying that he had only guessed, but Zizi was not convinced, and asked if he really guessed something with that much detail, because it seemed like they needed to go somewhere else and have a chat over tea. Everyone was looking directly at him, and the protagonist thought that this girl was very smart, and this would not be good at all. Suddenly Yer appeared among everyone, and asked the protagonist what was going on. He was surprised, asking why she was there. The policewoman was also surprised, and asked if she knew the protagonist. Yer explained that her car had broken down, and that she was taking it to the repair shop. She moved a little closer, and asked the protagonist again what was happening to him. BYU thought that he already knew that this woman was usually very mature and cold. However, in the situation, her tone of voice sounded like someone who had caught another person cheating. But suddenly, he saw a great opportunity in that. He winked at her and she was a little surprised. He ran over to her, held her hand, and shouted that it was not what she was thinking. He knelt in front of her, saying that he had nothing to do with that woman. Everyone around them was surprised by that attitude, and Bai-Wu shouted, pointing at Zizi, saying that she was the one who would not leave him alone. He told Zizi that they barely knew each other, In addition, he loved his girlfriend very much, and asked her to stop bothering him. ZZ became embarrassed, saying that this was not exactly what was happening. The people around them asked if this really was a cheating scandal, happening right in front of them, because it was exciting from the looks of it. That man had brought his lover to buy a car, and was caught red-handed by his wife, and judging by the wife's expression, she must be furious. ZZ also became irritated, and asked the protagonist who was bothering whom. Bai Wu held Year's arm, saying that she had witnessed it with her own eyes, and that this woman was the one preventing him from leaving. Year realized the situation and played along, saying that he was her boyfriend, and asking ZZ to stop bothering him. Everyone became excited, and ZZ was embarrassed and furious. Because of that situation, the protagonist thought that it had already reached this point, and now he could no longer back down. ZZ looked at Bai Wu and lost control, punching him, while he was kneeling in pain on the ground. ZZ walked away and passed by Year, saying that she was not interested in that boy, but advised her to be careful, because her boyfriend might not be a good person. Year asked how Bai Wu was. He stood up and thanked her, saying that although he had paid a high price, he had finally managed to get rid of that problem, for now, and she had been a great help in accomplishing that. Year smiled and said that the protagonist had also helped her before, and he could consider that her apology for involving him in that mess last time. But among all those people, Ching was also watching the protagonist and Year talking and smiling. She became so jealous that she said that if the protagonist bothered her girl again, she absolutely would not let him escape this time. The next day, Bai Yu was thinking that love affairs made heroes weak, and if he kept getting involved with those young women, he would not be able to do anything else. So in the future he should avoid them, cause fewer problems and focus on making his money. Because in life everything else was just an illusion. Only money was real. He returned to Antique Street, but Ting was following him happily. He thought that yesterday, he had calculated that he would find a treasure today, and this rhythm seemed familiar. He went to the usual stall, but when he arrived there, he was surprised to see that Wang was not there. The seller, who always stayed beside him, said that this was exactly the case, because they had said they were going to the countryside to look for some treasures, but Wang had already been absent for a few days. He asked the Golden Finger if the treasure he would find that day would not be through Wang, and the Golden Finger said it was 100%. He emphasized that this did not matter, and asked the other seller where he could find Wang, but the Golden Finger showed 0%, which surprised the protagonist, making him wonder what that meant. He asked his ability if this meant that he would not be able to find a treasure that day, and the system said that was exactly right. However, the protagonist was a little lost, because this differed greatly from what they had agreed on the previous day. This probably showed that there was a treasure, but he would not be able to find it. Bai Wu decided to ignore all of that, because first, he needed to find Wang and then worrying about it. Ting continued, watching every move the protagonist made. 30 minutes later he went to another stall, and found an item that was 100% authentic. He asked the seller how much that object cost. The merchant said it cost 3,000, but if the protagonist liked it that much, he could give him a 5% discount. But Bai Yu was not satisfied, and said that maybe a 50% discount would be more appropriate. The seller smiled, and said he agreed to the 50% discount. Bai Wu thought that once again, the owner did not know how much that item was really worth. However, he found it a little strange, because he had just found a treasure, but his ability was still pointing to failure. Ting appeared there saying that she would buy it for the original price of 3,000. Bai Wu thought that this was a huge coincidence. The seller wasted no time and offered it to the girl. He told the seller not to be in such a hurry, because they needed to go in order, and offered 10,000, but Ting raised it to 30,000. BYU realized that she was doing that on purpose, and now the stall owner thought that bronze furnace was very valuable, and would not sell it easily. Bai Wu laughed and said that he offered 50,000, emphasizing that if she made a higher bid, then that piece of trash would be hers. But Ting simply said that she offered 100,000, and asked what the protagonist thought of that. Bai Wu realized that he could not deceive that girl, and might need to keep raising the price. Ting only thought that if he wanted to keep playing, she did not care, because even if she simply bought that piece of trash, it would make no difference to her. The protagonist said that it was fine, and emphasized that she had won. As he left, he thought that she had made a bid, without clearly looking at the object, which meant that her target was him, not buying that thing, and he would be just stupid if he kept bidding and confronting her head-on. The system said that continuing to bid was useless, and that he needed to check the success rate, but he became irritated and told the system to shut up. As soon as Ting picked up the piece, she saw that it really looked like an authentic piece, from the Ming dynasty and from the looks of it. Bai Wu really was strange. She continued following him, and the protagonist asked if she had already finished shopping, but she only ignored him, saying that this street did not belong to him. He went to another stall and found an item offering 100,000, but she covered the price by offering 200,000, and this repeated several times. After a while, he became so irritated that he asked if she was there, only to target him, but she only smiled, saying that maybe it was because she trusted the protagonist's judgment, but it was obvious that he could deliberately raise the prices on purpose, or even choose only fake products. However, she had a lot of money and did not care about that. She approached, saying that he was the boy who had turned 20, was from Taichuan, came from an ordinary family, and was currently on leave. Although he had bought a top-of-the-line vehicle yesterday, she questioned whether his sudden wealth was not a little too sudden. Bai Wu asked if she was really investigating him, and emphasized that he was just an ordinary boy, trying his luck and finding a few treasures. This was legal income, and he had not committed any crime. Ching Ting said that it was fine after last time. He had said that he could predict the future, and calculated that he could find a treasure by himself, and that was incredible. But according to her investigation, he had been very ordinary for the first 20 years, and also had no family inheritance. In that field, she emphasized that she did not know what tricks he had used, and questioned whether he really thought he could reach the peak of life just by wishing for it, because that was a pathetic waste. She emphasized that it did not matter how he had done it, but she could promise one thing from that day on. She had cut off his path to wealth, so he should not even think about escaping mediocrity. From then on, BYU was surprised, asking if it was really a crime to want to stand out, and said that he knew what he should do. She continued thinking that she was in control, and asked him to say something, questioning if he was scared, because he had fallen silent. After she said she would cut off his wealth, the protagonist, almost losing control, called out to her and said that she had been deliberately raising prices, preventing him from making money, and he had been generous by avoiding arguing with her. And now she was saying that she would cut off his path to wealth. She asked if he really did not believe she could do that. The protagonist emphasized that it was impossible for her to do something like that, and walked away. She continued following him, saying that from the looks of it, he did not believe her, but she would make sure he could not earn a single cent. BYU simply analyzed the things around him, and she thought that as long as he bought something, she would make a higher bid to buy it, so she wanted to see what he was capable of. BYU looked at a seller, began greeting him, approached him and whispered into his ear. She thought that he must be preparing to buy something, and now it was time for her to show how to cut off his path to wealth. But Bai Wu simply left without buying anything, and she became a little confused by that situation. He did this over and over again. Ching Ting remained lost, questioning what he was doing, because he was just talking to all the sellers. Without buying anything, he asked the Golden Finger what the success rate of his plan was, and the answer was 100%. He laughed and said that now it was his time to act. He called everyone over and told the bosses that he wanted to buy everything in their shops. Ching Ting thought that he was planning to find a treasure inside the shop, and in order to prevent her from causing problems, he had deliberately used quantity to hide what he wanted to buy. She asked the protagonist if he really believed this could stop her, because if he believed that, he was just a fool. BYU only smiled, saying that if the bosses had no objections, then they could complete the transaction now. But she stepped in, asking them to wait, and said that she also wanted everything from all the shops. The protagonist asked her not to exaggerate. She emphasized that anything he tried to buy, she would offer more for, so his path to wealth was completely sealed. The protagonist emphasized that he knew she was very rich. However, all those sellers had a very large amount of stock, and questioned whether she really could buy everything, or was just bluffing to scare him. Ching Ting became irritated, asking if he was really trying to look down on her, and questioning what right he had to do that. She only asked them to state the total price of everything in the shop because she would give 10% more. Everyone watched, but she prepared to make the payment, saying that everyone would make money, so they needed to hurry up. A short while later, she sent the check to everyone, and one of the sellers told her to provide an address so they could deliver everything. Ching Ting simply told them to leave an address or a card, because she would ask her butler to go to them and pick up the things after making the purchase. She looked at the protagonist and asked where all the arrogance he had shown earlier had gone, because from the looks of it, she really could block his path to wealth whenever she wanted. But Bai Wu only kept laughing and walked past her. He went to the sellers, and they all said that he was an excellent salesman. As they had agreed, all that money was split 50% for each side, and they would transfer it immediately. He hugged the sellers, who continued, saying that they had already transferred the money, and that if he had any more good news in the future, he could come to them again. Ching Ting became furious when she saw Bai Wu showing all the transfers, went over to the sellers, and asked if they had been working together. The protagonist said that was exactly right, because earlier, He had been wandering around the antique market, looking for sellers who wanted to cooperate. To make the whole plan easier, she was impulsive and easily angered, and she made the payment as soon as he provoked her. And now, just as he had said before, his path to wealth could not be interrupted by someone with low intelligence. Qingting became furious and said that it was a good move, but he had better remember it. The protagonist kept laughing and told her to have a nice trip and not let the door hit her on the way out. Suddenly he noticed something happening. A system screen appeared before him, saying that the system update was in progress. He was surprised, wondering what this would bring. Suddenly the update finished, and the system said that he could use his imagination to fill in the most creative and surprising line. As he was leaving, he thought that, although he had made a profit from that girl, just as she had said, her family was large and powerful, and he could not compete with that. He had thought the system would update into something incredible, but there had been no change, and he needed to use it to understand a little more about the difference. In addition, his strength was far from enough. At the moment he lacked connections and financial resources to make a lot of money, so he needed to expand his network a little more, but he still did not know how he should do that. As soon as he approached the car, he saw a man standing beside it. The man asked if he was Bai Wu and introduced himself, saying that he was Miss Qingting's butler. The protagonist asked if he was there to get revenge for her defeat, because he was probably secretly a master fighter or a retired special forces soldier. But the butler said that was not quite it, because his lady wished to invite him to a gathering of influential people, as an apology for the misunderstanding. Bai Wu was a little suspicious, thinking that she probably had ulterior motives. However, he could use this opportunity to meet influential people and expand his network later. He told the butler that there was no problem, because he accepted going. A few hours later he appeared at the agreed place, and she was waiting at the door, saying that she thought he would not show up. The protagonist emphasized that, even if it was a hostile banquet, Liu Bang had walked away unharmed, so what should he be afraid of? Qingting asked him to follow her, because she wanted to introduce him to some people. She showed him 3 people, saying that the blonde one was the future successor of the Shanghai group. Young Master Wang, the one in the middle, was Mr. Zhou, head of Xingchuan Technology, and lastly Madame Lu, CEO of Yaifu Media. She was sure that he had heard of them before. Bai Wu was surprised, thinking that all of them were genuinely influential people, and in truth he was a little nervous seeing them. This must be what they called self-aware inferiority. She smiled, thinking that this was just as expected from an uncultured nouveau rich, because he became unsettled around influential people. Now she would see firsthand how else he could be humiliated. But the protagonist realized that she only wanted to make him play the fool. However, the more he did not want to be nervous, the more nervous he became, and if this continued, he would definitely embarrass himself. Suddenly he finally understood the situation, and thought that he did not care about influential people, because all of them ate, drank, and needed to go to the bathroom, so he only needed to imagine all of them using the bathroom, and that way he would not be so nervous. Bai Wu smiled and greeted them, saying that it was a pleasure to meet them, and introduced himself by name. Qingting was surprised, wondering how he had suddenly become so calm. 5 minutes later the two went to a table, and she said that he had done very well. What surprised her quite a lot was that he managed to talk with influential people so calmly. The protagonist emphasized that influential people were no different from ordinary people. Qing emphasized that the difference between classes could not be seen with the naked eye alone. Suddenly a person went onto the stage and told all the guests that they would now move on to the main theme of that hall's gathering, which was the charity auction. The protagonist was surprised by this. Qingting smiled, called him a country bumpkin, and asked if he really needed her to explain what it was. The protagonist used a popular saying that he did not need an explanation, because although he had never eaten pork, he had seen pigs running, so he knew very well what a charity auction meant. Qingting looked at him, saying that this was very great, and showed a box, saying that inside it was a porcelain bowl from the Ming dynasty, and she would like to auction it at that auction. She pushed the box onto the table, saying that he was an antique expert, so he could help her appraise it for the auction. Bai Wu asked if she really wanted him to do that, and questioned what benefit it would bring him. Qingting emphasized that she was doing this only for charity, and if he wanted, the auction could be held in his name. She asked if he had not said that he wanted to make a lot of money, because if he really wanted to do that, gaining a good reputation in front of influential people would be very beneficial to him in the future. BYU thought that this really made sense. Everyone there was influential, and making them remember him would truly help expand his network in the future. However, he remained suspicious, saying that something was not right, and asked why she would deliberately want to help him. Qingting said that it was very simple, because it was better to resolve enmity than let it continue, and she did not want things to become too awkward between them. The protagonist remained on alert, thinking that he could not trust that woman, because she was probably trying to set up some scheme. He asked his ability if it was fake, but his ability said that the authenticity was 100%, with an additional condition. In addition, the recent transaction price was 12.5 million. Seeing that the antique really was real, he asked the ability if the auction could be a failure. But the chance of success was 100%. He thought that both the antique and the auction would be successful, so there was nothing he needed to worry about, and from the looks of it, he had been thinking too much before taking any action. Even if she had a scheme, he had the system, so he did not need to be afraid. Cheng Ting prepared to take the box back, asking if he agreed, because if he did not want to, it was fine. The protagonist held the box, saying that he agreed and loved doing good deeds. The announcer said that the next item was the final item of that charity auction. Bai Wu looked at Cheng Ting, who had a somewhat strange expression on her face, which made him think that there was probably something strange behind all of this. The auctioneer said that this item was being provided by Mr. Bai Wu. The protagonist thought that he had already come too far, and that overthinking now was useless. The antique was real, and the auction also had a 100% success rate, so he wanted to see what tricks she could pull. He placed the box on the table and said his name to everyone, saying that it was a pleasure to meet them. But as soon as he removed the lid of the box, it revealed a roll of toilet paper, leaving him surprised. People began mocking the situation, asking if the organizers had brought that to liven up the atmosphere. The protagonist thought that he had known it would not be that simple, so this was what she had been planning from the beginning. He tried to imagine when she had swapped it, because the antique had been tested and was 100% real. He remembered that she had said her earring had fallen, and asked him to pick it up as soon as he bent down. That was probably when she had switched the boxes. He thought that this was a very deep strategy, because she was laughing while watching that situation. The auctioneer also mocked him, asking if the protagonist had been in a hurry to use the bathroom, and had actually gone up onto the stage with toilet paper. Ching Ching was enjoying the moment, thinking that this time she had managed to make him play the fool. However, the protagonist thought that he could not let this go cheaply, because if he ran away now, it would mean falling completely into the plan she had made. Because of that, he needed to find a way to save the situation. If everything collapsed, rumors would spread everywhere, and he would not be able to continue his career. Some people kept laughing, saying that if he did not have a presentation, he needed to leave the stage, because they were just standing there, looking at an idiot. Another person asked the host to kick the protagonist out, because they needed to continue. The auctioneer said that perhaps Bai Wu needed to step down and wipe off some sweat. The protagonist became irritated, thinking that he could not simply admit defeat like this, so he would go all in and desperately bet on what needed to be done. He concentrated, because the auction success rate had been 100%, so there had to be a way to resolve it. However, he thought that the success rate was not everything. In a situation like this, all he could do was rely on his improvisation. All those years writing novels had not been for nothing, so he needed to put his creativity to work. He held the toilet paper in his hand, saying that in everyone's eyes, this might just be half a roll of toilet paper, but to him it was the most precious gift. The people stopped talking and began paying attention. Ting Ting became worried, trying to guess what kind of trick that guy was pulling. Now the protagonist said that, although he might seem strong and powerful, at the moment in truth, he had been a crybaby when he was a little younger, suffering bullying and threats from other children. He always went home crying, and his mother tried to cheer him up, because it was his birthday, and they were eating longevity noodles. Since his family was very poor, his father gave him a roll of toilet paper as a birthday gift. The protagonist emphasized that he had been very young and could not understand it, so he asked his father why he was giving him toilet paper as a gift. His father, with great experience, touched his head and said that he was a man, and men bleed but they do not cry. Because of that, he wanted the protagonist to use that gift as motivation. Whenever he could not stop himself from crying, he should use it to wipe away his tears, because his father believed deeply in his potential. This made the protagonist look at the world with different eyes, believing that he could become someone in the future and have half the manliness his father carried in his chest. He emphasized that not long after that, his parents passed away in an accident. His family was very poor, and all he inherited was a pile of debts and that roll of toilet paper. He took a deep breath and said that he remembered his father's words, so he kept reminding himself not to cry. But the hardships of life could only be understood through experience. With tears in his eyes and his hand trembling, he raised his face and said that, whenever he felt he could no longer continue, he would tear off a piece of that roll of toilet paper to wipe away his tears and tell himself that he had to be stronger. In this way, step by step, he had reached that place, and earned the right to be present at that auction, so that half roll of toilet paper was proof of his struggles and achievements, as well as all his defeats and tears. Because of that, at that important moment, he was willing to auction off something extremely precious to him, a roll of toilet paper to contribute to charity and help other people earn their place in the world. Everyone stopped laughing and fell silent. Qingting was shocked and thought that from the looks of it, that boy did not know what kind of place this was to try something like that. However, everyone remained quiet, and she thought that it had not had much effect. The protagonist kept looking around and thought that there really would not be any bid or reaction. Suddenly, someone began applauding, saying that the story was quite interesting and that he liked the protagonist, so he would bid 100,000. Bai Wu felt relieved and the auctioneer said it was sold. With that, the auction would be concluded. The protagonist was impressed to see that the auctioneer really had good qualities, because he seized the situation and ended everything. Trembling with nerves, he thought that fortunately, he was a novelist and could improvise a story to get out of any situation. Otherwise, he would have been completely humiliated. Qingting stood up to leave, and the protagonist looked at her, asking if she really expected him to be humiliated because he had managed to handle the situation. Qingting remained irritated and said that he had only been lucky this time, but next time he might not be so lucky. She left and he breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that although he had saved his reputation, his plan to meet influential people had been completely ruined. He went to the parking lot, thinking that, even though he had overcome that situation by inventing a story, in their eyes he had only been a clown, so he had to admit that the one who had come out victorious this time was Qingting. Without her, no one would pay attention to him now. He had to work hard to make money, because with money came status and dignity. Suddenly a luxury car passed in front of him. Bai Wu was surprised, wondering why the big shot, who had bought his toilet paper, had left with Ye. He asked why they were together, and the system said that she had a business partnership with the other party, and the two families were about to be united through marriage. Bai Wu was surprised, wondering why there was suddenly more intelligence within the system, and maybe this was because of the previous update. But now that he knew about the marriage, he finally understood why Qingting was acting that way. The world of the rich was truly complicated, so he should stop trying to get involved, since the important thing was to focus on making money. In addition, he should find some helpers in the antique circle, since this was the circle he was familiar with. He remembered Wang and thought that in truth, he missed him a little, wondering if it was possible that he had found some other treasure recently. The system said that Wang Pengzi might have another treasure to collect. From now on, he would call the seller Hongxi. The protagonist smiled, thinking that this guy was incredible, because he always found treasures. But the one who got rich was the protagonist, so maybe it would be even better if he formed a partnership with that guy. He had connections in the antique circle, and was quite eloquent, so he could take the lead in places where it would be inconvenient for Bai Yu to step forward. So with Pengzi's help, his future in the antique world would become much easier because of that. He needed to do this the next day at his stall. Pengzi was receiving a phone call, asking why he was not there yet, but suddenly received the news that yes, they had been waiting for him for quite some time. Then the protagonist approached. Pengzi became irritated and asked what business he had there, calling him unlucky because he had nothing left to sell. Bai Wu asked him not to be so angry, because he was there to talk about a partnership. Pengzi questioned what kind of partnership this was. Bai Wu explained that the merchant's luck was immense, and he always found good things. Byu said that his sharp eye could always identify true treasures, so if they formed a partnership, it would be a good combination. Byu explained that if they formed a partnership, they could split the profit 50-50, and asked what the merchant thought about it. Pengzi, irritated, said that the protagonist had beaten him twice, meaning he had eaten the meat and drunk the soup, barely leaving him the bowl to lick. So, how did he dare come there to talk about a partnership? Pengzi emphasized that the protagonist was probably there only to mock him and asked him to leave, because he did not want to have that conversation anymore. Byu realized that he still held a grudge over what had happened the last two times, and was still very angry. So if the protagonist kept insisting on that matter, things could end up getting out of control. Byu thought that his goal was not to go there to pick a fight, so maybe he needed to step back for now. In any case, there would be opportunities to catch him next time, and sooner or later, he would be completely under his control. While Byu was leaving, two other people approached Pengzi and began discussing something. The protagonist noticed this and thought that perhaps Pengzi was in big trouble. Pengzi said that he would like to see what they had to sell. The old man looked suspicious, but showed the sword. The other seller emphasized that he had personally looked at it, and it was definitely Salsal's 7-star sword. Pengzi began analyzing the sword, but protagonist kept observing. thinking that this story was quite exaggerated. However, he noticed that the merchant was looking very closely and asked his ability if that sword was real, but the system warned that it was completely fake. Pangsy finished analyzing it and emphasized that the item was indeed genuine, asking them to state their price. BYU thought that the merchant really was a complete idiot because he wanted to buy a fake, or maybe that sword was so well made that even the merchant had not noticed. He asked what the chance was of Pangsy seeing through that fraud, and the system said it was 0%. The protagonist realized that Pangsy was very experienced, and if he could be fooled by that sword, it meant the forgery skill was very high. But unfortunately, it could not fool his fiery eyes. However, he did not know what was wrong with that sword, because he could not see it. Suddenly the system changed again, and showed some details that had not appeared before. Because of that he analyzed every detail, but dismissed the jewel and the gemstone, since Pangsy was very experienced, and if it were something that simple, he would definitely have noticed immediately. So the flaw was probably beneath the gemstone. BYU thought that if he helped him now, he could refuse to owe him a favor, but it was time to reveal the methods he truly used. Since his intelligence was enough to scheme against him, those two petty thieves should not even think about it. BYU walked over to the three of them, and Pangsy became a little irritated. But BYU said that it was fine, and asked him to stop hiding the sword. He asked if that SSR level 7-star sword was really max level because every new player received one. Pangsy asked what he meant by that. BYU said that it was exactly what it sounded like. Pangsy became irritated, and said he had personally examined the sword, both its shape and condition, as well as the patina and damage, and everything was completely flawless. In addition, he had been in the antique circle for more than a decade, so how did the protagonist think? He could not tell whether something was fake or real. Pangsy thought that this was just a plan the protagonist was making to try to steal his sword, and questioned whether they had some kind of grudge. For this to happen, BYU asked what would happen if he could prove that the sword was fake, and if he did that, perhaps Pangsy could follow him from then on. Pangsy asked what would happen if the sword was real, because he did not want the protagonist. BYU asked the seller how much he was selling that sword for. Pangsy became even more irritated, saying that obviously the protagonist was asking the price because he wanted to steal the sale. The seller said that he was selling it for 500,000. BYU emphasized that if he was wrong, he would pay 10 times more, meaning the price would become 5 million. Pangsy immediately accepted and handed the sword to the protagonist, saying that since he had said it, he had to keep his word. He asked Master Bai to step forward in front of everyone and open everyone's eyes by showing how that sword could be fake. BYU held the sword and asked them to watch carefully, because he would give everyone a small lesson. He picked up a bottle from the ground, asking if it was a useful and perfect weapon for everyone. Pangsy asked what he was trying to do with that. The protagonist struck the sword hard and knocked a stone to the ground, leaving everyone surprised. Pangsy became irritated and asked if the protagonist was going crazy. BYU analyzed where that gemstone had fallen from and began laughing, asking himself if that fat idiot would still dare to keep refusing him now. He showed the sword and asked if QR codes existed. During the Three Kingdoms period, Pangsy could not believe it, and the protagonist asked if he was now willing to follow him, because he was the true expert. When it came to antiques, Pangsy became very irritated by that situation, because those two had really been trying to deceive him. He asked if the two of them were tired of living, but as soon as he looked to the side, he realized they were no longer there. He kept shouting, saying that they were lucky to have escaped, and that if he found them again, they would have to pay. Pangsy looked at the protagonist and asked how he knew that sword was fake, questioning whether it was possible that he had hired those two. BYU asked if he was really listening to what he had just asked, because if he could get his hands on items of that quality, then why would he have looked for Pangsy to form a partnership? And as for how he discovered it, he once heard a wise man say that everyone had their own methods, and those should not be shared. Pangsy said that maybe it was better to forget that situation, because he really did not want to hear it. The protagonist said that if he was not mistaken, there had been an agreement about the bet before. He showed that the sword was fake, and since he had won, the merchant would have to follow him. But Pangsy refused, saying that the protagonist was too deep, and he could not see through all of it, so he was a little afraid of being tricked. He emphasized that the protagonist should find someone else for this partnership. BYU explained that Pangsy was being a little unreasonable. With all of this, Pangsy explained that he made a living in the antique market and really did have some integrity, while the big shots in the circle only told lies and had no integrity at all. The protagonist was impressed to learn about the major figures in the industry. The merchant continued refusing, saying that maybe it was better to forget this whole partnership thing. However, he remembered all his debts and favors, so he could not let the protagonist have helped him for nothing. He said that the protagonist could choose anything from his stall as thanks for the help he had just given. Bai Wu asked what kind of junk this was. Pangzi became irritated, saying that all those treasures had been collected by him personally, and asked the protagonist to take a look, saying that this was the kasaya worn by Venerable Shanzong on his journey to the west. The protagonist asked if he had stolen that costume from some theater troupe because it still had cigarette burn holes. Pangzi became a little worried about that situation and decided to change items, showing him a large bowl that Wusong had used to drink before fighting the leopard at Jingyang Ridge. The protagonist emphasized that it looked just like a bowl from the ramen shop on the same street and questioned whether he was really capable of finding a reliable item. Pangzi realized that nothing was working, so he said that he would really show his most precious treasure and began searching through his things. The protagonist only kept looking, thinking that there was a lot of junk there and that the merchant was not doing very well. Thinking about it carefully, he really had gotten the better of Pangzi and made a fortune several times, so it was no wonder he held such a huge grudge. A short while later, Pangzi finally found what he was looking for. Bai Wu asked what it was this time and whether he had stolen it from some old man doing morning exercises in the park. Pangzi said that now he would open the protagonist's eyes because this was the twin feather sword used by Liu Bei, Liu Xuanyi from the Three Kingdoms period. Suddenly the system managed to verify the sword and warned that the owner was being confirmed as Liu Bei. But an answer appeared, saying that it could not confirm this. The protagonist was surprised and asked if it was really real. Pangzi said yes, but he could not give it to the protagonist because he was counting on it to return to the market. Bai Wu thought that from the looks of it, that fat man's treasure was that sword, and destiny really was on his side. The protagonist had an idea, thinking that this was like a springboard, and with it he could legitimately meet that person. So, he needed to find a way to get his hands on that sword. Pangzi asked if the protagonist had finished looking for what he wanted, because if he really thought there were no treasures there, then he would be shocked. By Wu emphasized that first, it was Cao Dao's 7-star sword, and now Liu Bei's twin feather sword. From the looks of it, he really was facing the Three Kingdoms now. Pangzi began telling the protagonist to look at the shape, the condition and the very fine patina. Bai Wu interrupted him, saying that the merchant had said the same thing about the 7-star sword. Before Pangzi began to become a little worried, and the protagonist moved a little closer, asking if he could guess that from the looks of it, this sword also had a code. Pangzi looked at the 7-star sword on the ground and became disappointed. He looked at the sword in his hand, thinking that the characteristics of that sword and the previous one were all very similar, and that the forgers were truly skilled. Upset, he emphasized that he had thought he could collect the weapons of Liu Bei and Soso and sell them for a sky-high price. But everything had gone wrong. Irritated, he began shaking the sword in his hands, saying that he had been deceived consecutively, and from the looks of it, he would be struck by lightning too. Bai Wu held the sword, saying that the merchant now looked very pathetic, so he would help him. The protagonist said that he would keep that sword, and asked the merchant to name his price, because he would not bargain, and would pay whatever he asked. Pangzi, who was already sad, said that he had said the protagonist could choose anything, so he could take the sword and leave. Bai Wu thanked him for that. As he was leaving, he realized that Pangzi really looked pathetic and very sad, so he needed to find some chance to let him make a good profit. Otherwise the protagonist would feel a little bad about the whole situation. Because of that, he wished he had met old Mr. Seiichi back then, but he was a big shot in the antique circle, and a gift that was not substantial would not work for him within that circle. There was a pyramid. At the top were the mysterious buyers. Then came the major successes of the industry, which was where Yongkang currently stood. Right after that came the new force of the industry, which was where the protagonist had established himself. For now, next were the veterans of that industry, which was where Pangzi was. And beneath all of that were the industry's elementary school students, the people who were deceived or just starting out, so they bought things at high prices. Bai Yu thought that, now that he had the twin feather sword, he could deliver it to old Che, because this really was a treasure that had found its rightful owner. He went to the pavilion, but before entering, he thought that he really did not want to meet that troublesome Zizi again. He entered the shop, and a woman was cleaning some things. He went over to her and asked if old Che was present. The girl smiled and apologized, saying that her boss was busy at the moment and could not receive visitors. The protagonist asked the system if it was possible that Yang Kong would want to see him, if he knew what the matter really was, and the system said yes. So the protagonist asked the woman to inform Mr. Seiichi that the person who sold the Tong Sun Kai last time was visiting him again. The woman was surprised and said that it was fine, asking the protagonist to wait just a moment, because she would inform him immediately. Suddenly someone asked if he really was the one who had sold the Tong Sunkai to Grandpa. The protagonist was startled and thought that it was truly pathetic. To fear exactly what was going to happen, Baiwu acted politely and called her miss, saying that they had finally met again. But Zizio was already warming up, and the protagonist became frightened, asking what was going on. She then looks at the protagonist and says that, combining old and new grudges, she must teach him a good lesson now. The system flashed red warning of an emergency, and informed him that the probability of an injury that would keep him from standing was 100%. ZZ tried to punch him, but the protagonist dodged and ran away. She grabbed a vase and asked where he was going, trying to throw it at him, but her grandfather appeared angrily in front of her, making her stop at the last second. He shouted, asking what nonsense she was doing now, and ordered her to put the vase down immediately. The old man emphasized that this was already getting out of control, ordering her to go back home and reflect on her actions. Since she could not go against her grandfather, she ended up obeying, but warned the protagonist that he only needed to wait, and asked him not to let the two of them meet again outside, otherwise he would not have the same luck. BYU watched her leave the pavilion, thinking that he had managed to avoid a disaster. However, he did not think she would simply leave. Obediently she went outside, saying that she would not leave like that, and would wait there. Young Kong apologized on behalf of his granddaughter, saying that the protagonist was being very modest, because she had been spoiled by her grandmother, and was now very ignorant. BYU smiled, and said that she was a very direct and honest person, someone with a strong character, and that was very good for someone. However, the protagonist noticed that the expression on that old man's face showed that he had something in mind. The system notified him, saying that it was only capable of analyzing success rates, and could not read minds. Baiwu thought that from the looks of it, the system update had only improved its ability to complain. Young Kong asked the protagonist to follow him, because they could talk more peacefully in the tea room on the upper floor of the pavilion. Once inside the room, the protagonist was impressed, and said that the tea room was truly extraordinary. Young Kong thanked him for the compliment, and said that those were only some random items he had placed there, because he could not bear to display them. Baiyu thought that the old man was being very modest, because the items inside that room were clearly meant to be shown off. Young Kong poured some tea, and emphasized that if the protagonist was visiting, it probably meant he had found another treasure. Baiyu showed the sword, and asked Young Kong to take a look at it. He was surprised and smiled, saying that it seemed to be a treasure from the Eastern Han Dynasty. The protagonist emphasized that ordinary items were not worthy of Young Kang's sharp eyes, and only pieces this fine were suitable for a victorious person like him. The old man emphasized that a pair of Eastern Han Dynasty swords, in that kind of condition, would currently fetch around 5 million at auction. Baiwu asked how much it would be worth if that were the sword of Emperor Zhao. Young Kang emphasized that if it was an item used by Duke Zhao in his early years, then the price would be 10 times higher. Baiyu smiled, saying that, as the saying went, a good sword was meant for a hero, and since old Mr. Che's virtue matched that sword, Baiyu, as a junior, wished to present it to him as a gift to show his admiration. But Young Kong asked the protagonist not to flatter him so much, because if he managed to sell that sword to certain international buyers, it would probably reach an extremely high price. Baiwu emphasized that in the world of antiques, what mattered was finding the right owner. Such a treasure should belong to Young Kong, so the protagonist would not sell it to anyone else, no matter how high the offer was. Young Kong looked at him, and placed the sword on the table, saying that they should drink tea. BYU realized that something was wrong, and asked if it was possible that Young Kang was not satisfied with the sword, or perhaps not satisfied with the protagonist himself. The system said that his satisfaction with the sword was 100%, but his satisfaction with the protagonist was only 10%. Young Kang explained that the gift was too precious, so he did not dare accept it. In addition, when making friends, he valued character and ability more than the value of a gift. Because of that, he would like to maintain their friendship in a gentlemanly manner. The protagonist was surprised, thinking that this was a direct rejection of him, and from the looks of it, he was not qualified to be Young Kang's friend. The system said that he really was not qualified for that. Young Kang emphasized that the sword was a good item, and its market price was 5 million, so he would pay that price. He handed the check to the protagonist, saying that if he found any good item in the future, he could bring it there, because he would not treat him unfairly. Baiwu realized that the old man was a major figure in the industry, and was probably treating Baiwu like pansy, thinking he was trying to curry favor by passing off the sword as Liu Bei's. And now that old man had become even more interesting, so if the protagonist did not show some real ability, he would not be able to win him over. He looked toward the window, had an idea, and said that business was truly business, And if Mr. Chi really wanted to buy that sword, then that price was not right. Yang Kang questioned what the protagonist meant by that. Bai Yu emphasized that the old man himself had just said that, if it was indeed a sword used by Liu Bei, its value would be 50 million. Yang Kang asked if Bai Yu was truly certain that the sword had been used by the Duke. Bai Yu began drinking some tea and said yes, asking if Yang Kang had never been curious about how, at the protagonist's age, he could immediately identify genuine items. Old Che said that the protagonist did indeed have penetrating eyes, and asked if it was possible that he had a family tradition of study. The protagonist explained that, to be completely honest, he had some family experience, but it was not related to antique appraisal, but rather to divination. Yang Kang questioned whether he was truly skilled in the itching, and whether all the antiques had been discovered through divination. The protagonist said that was exactly right, and that it was not only antiques, but also other things, and to prove it, he could say that ZZ was hiding outside the window. Yang Kang was surprised by this, and the protagonist thought that now it was up to ZZ to bring down her own grandfather. ZZ really was hanging outside the window, saying that the protagonist, that scoundrel, would probably try to deceive her grandfather again. Because of that, she needed to hear what they were saying inside. As soon as she stuck her head through the window, her grandfather was staring at her. Bai Wu thought that fortunately, he had used the system to check her location earlier. ZZ was surprised to see her grandfather, and the protagonist mocked the situation, saying that he did not know she had Spider-Woman's abilities. ZZ became even more irritated, asking how he dared mock her in that situation, because if he continued she would show him how a young woman taught a good lesson. Her grandfather became angry, and she said that she already knew she was wrong. Then she jumped down from the window, saying that she would go home and reflect immediately. Bai Wu asked if Yang Kang now believed that he could divine things, but the old man said that maybe the protagonist had merely heard something outside the window and guessed that it was her. So that alone was not enough to make him believe that Bai Wu was omniscient. The protagonist thought that this old man really was difficult to deal with, and decided to ask what would be necessary to make him believe that story. Yang Kang said that if the protagonist really were omniscient and could divine and predict things, then he should not be asking that question. BYU felt that he was being outplayed by that old man, and if he did not quickly find a way to persuade him, he would lose the chance for cooperation. He asked the system what the probability was of convincing the old man. The system warned that the probability was 87.25%. Bai Wu was surprised by such a high success rate, but still did not know what he should do. After thinking for a while, he finally discovered which path he should take. He asked the system if revealing the true origins of all the antiques inside that would be enough to persuade the old man. The system said that he was correct, and the probability was 100%. Bai Wu emphasized that he had been observing, and that there were a total of 26 ancient items inside that room, but the old man emphasized that identifying 26 antiques inside that room only showed that the protagonist knew how to count, and that did not prove that he could truly divine things. Bai Wu interrupted the old man and asked him to simply listen carefully. Yang Kang said that he was willing to listen. The protagonist smiled, seeing that the old man was still very calm, but would be shocked in just a few moments. He ordered the system to begin the operation, and quickly identified all of the items present. Bai Wu said that the set of rosewood furniture was from the Qianlong era of the Qing dynasty. Yang Kang said that he had done quite well. BYU emphasized that it should be imperial furniture, worth around 20 million, and asked if he was right about that. The old man said that he was indeed completely correct, but to convince him that was still not enough. Bai Wu picked up a stone in his hand, and said that it was a superior black jade inkstone, an item from the Wanli period of the Ming dynasty, valued at around 5 million. The old man still remained calm, and said that he was right. The protagonist emphasized that this black jade inkstone should have previously been used by Zhang Zhisheng, the Grand Secretary, during the Wanli reign of the Ming dynasty. This made the old man surprised. He stood up quickly and asked the protagonist how he knew that, because they, the older experts, had spent a whole years consulting countless historical records before confirming the origin of that inkstone. Bai Yu laughed and said that naturally he had divined it. Yang Kang remained surprised, questioning how this could be possible. The protagonist only smiled and said that from the looks of it, he needed to see to believe, so he only had to keep watching patiently. Yang Kang apologized, saying that he had lost his composure, and asked the protagonist to continue. Bai Wu said that the brush holder was an item from the imperial study of Emperor Jiaqing of the Qing dynasty. Those brushes were from the Republic of China era. That bronze wine pot was an item from the state of Song during the spring and autumn period. The blue and white porcelain was from the Hushan Kill of Jingdezhen. from the Yuan dynasty. Yang Kang was truly shocked by all of this, and the protagonist emphasized that he had explained the origins of all 26 antiques, asking if he still had any doubts about his abilities. The old man said no more, because if he had not seen it with his own eyes, he would not have believed it at all. Byu asks if he now believes him. When he said that that sword was used by Liu Bei, the old man said that the protagonist was indeed a divine calculator, and because of that, he deserved admiration. He emphasized that he had already verified the lineage and origin of the items in that room. However, he could not confirm whether that sword had actually been used by the Duke, claiming that the Duke had used it, based only on the protagonist's deduction, seemed a little too mystical. Byu was surprised by this answer, and thought that from the looks of it, the old man still did not believe him. However, the system said that this was not true, emphasizing that the old man believed the protagonist 100%. Byu was confused because if the old man believed him, then why was he still arguing about it? Maybe this was just provocation, or maybe it was because he needed something that the protagonist should help him solve. The system showed 100% for that question. Byu thought that old man was formidable because he had just won him over, and with a frown the old man was already using the 36 stratagems against him again. But that was already expected from a major figure in the industry, a true master of human nature. He asked the system if apparently that old man had something in mind, and questioned whether it could be that item. The system said that was correct. The protagonist asked again if the matter the old man was worried about was related to antiques, and the system said yes. Byu questioned whether there was some item that the old man could not appraise, and because of that, wanted the protagonist to appraise it. The system emphasized that this was 100% correct. The protagonist laughed and asked Mr. Chi if there was any item he wanted him to appraise. Yang Kang was surprised again, asking how he had discovered that. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.